Good afternoon. This is Cassie with NASEO. We're going to wait just a minute more to let folks join, and then we'll get started. Good afternoon, all, and welcome to NASEO State EV Infrastructure Workshop on medium and heavy duty vehicle electrification. My name is Cassie Powers. I'm with the National Association of State Energy Officials. We're delighted to have you joining us. This is the third event in our workshop series designed to help states prepare for EV infrastructure investment through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which was signed into law in November. And today's workshop is going to build on conversations from our previous events on NASEO State Infrastructure Summit hosted in September, as well as our workshop on electric system considerations and rate design options for EVs. And we hope to take insights from today's discussion to help inform the development of an online state EV planning toolkit that NASEO is developing with our partners at ICF and Atlas Public Policy. We are quite thankful for the continued partnership with NREL, as well as the Department of Energy's Vehicle Technologies Office, who are supporting this initiative. Now on to the good stuff. I did want to talk a little bit about today's discussion. We're going to be focusing on opportunities to support the electrification of fleet and freight vehicles. And we are joined by experts from the public and private sector who are going to share insights and best practices and engage in a discussion on what is needed to address these barriers to medium and heavy duty electrification. As you'll see from the agenda, we'll of course do a round of welcome and introductions, and then we'll have an excellent discussion on public transit and bus fleets. We'll take a short break, and then we'll dive into a discussion on freight transportation and port infrastructure, and then we'll talk a little bit about our next steps. One of the reasons that we are choosing to focus this workshop on medium and heavy duty electrification is really its untapped potential to impact emissions and help impact the negative effects of climate change. There's historically been quite a bit of focus on electrifying passenger vehicles, and there's certainly ample opportunities through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act to support the electrification of passenger vehicles. But that said, medium and heavy duty vehicles do have a disproportionate impact on fuel use and transportation emissions, and states are in a unique place right now to make a significant impact on the medium and heavy duty sector with funding through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And so with that, we've assembled an excellent panel, as well as some experts from states, the private sector, federal government, who are here to tell us about where we are with electrifying the medium and heavy duty sector, what some of the key barriers are to electrification, and then to explore what is needed to address those barriers. And so we'll go through a round of introductions, but before we do that, I did want to turn it over to Mark Smith with the Department of Energy's Vehicle Technologies Office, who is a supporter of this initiative, to offer a few words of welcome. Mark?
Great. Thank you, Cassie, and thanks for having us. This is a great partnership that we've put together that I think, Cassie, we started these conversations right about a year ago, and certainly it's blossomed and grown to more than I think what we were chatting about at the time, but very important work. And as we look at our mission at DOE in support of the administration's goals to decarbonize the transportation sector by 2050, we need to get moving quickly. And while 2050 may seem like a long time away, we really need to be able to make sure that these vehicle options for electrification are available in the market and being adopted by the early 2030s, because something like transit buses that we're going to be talking about, most transit agencies keep transit buses for a minimum of 12 years. If you're looking at school buses, school districts keep school buses for 15 years and up. You look at some of our friends in the package delivery business, the UPSs and the FedExes, and those trucks you see coming through your neighborhoods, those brown delivery trucks, those last 20 years, they keep those for 20 years plus. So we need to make sure that the transportation choices for medium and heavy duty, as well with all other sectors of transportation electrification, are available and in the market and being commercialized by the early 2030s. So we do need to be moving quickly, and as a result, these conversations are very timely. Certainly, as Cassie mentioned, looking at medium duty and heavy duty, that's where you have the opportunities to make the biggest impacts in emissions and petroleum displacement, as we've seen with the deployment of other alternative fuels through the years. So a very important sector, but not unlike other new fuels and alternative fuels that have to be adopted, and looking at both the vehicle side and the infrastructure side. A lot of challenges, but a lot of opportunities as well. So timely conversations. We're excited to be part of this, and looking forward to continuing to support everyone's efforts and to be a resource for you. So with that, Cassie, thank you, and we'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. And so I wanted to do just a couple notes on the format for the discussion. And so we've structured this event as a roundtable fishbowl, similar to our previous workshop. And so we've got a number of folks on the screen who will serve as our roundtable experts and panelists. There'll be a few folks that will tee us up with some presentations at the beginning of each of the sessions, and then the states and private sector partners and federal government partners will participate in the discussion. You all who are on screen can feel free to chime in at any time. You can raise your hand. There'll be an orderly way for me to call on you and manage the discussion, and you can unmute your mics at that time. We do have quite a few folks who are listening into the webinar as well, from state agencies, including state energy offices, state departments of transportation, state environment agencies, as well as PUCs, as well as some partners from co-ops, IOUs, and the utilities. And so those who are listening in, you can feel free to use the Q&A function or the chat at any time to send in questions or comments. One thing to note is that I imagine we'll get quite a few questions and comments in the chat and through the Q&A. It's unlikely we'll be able to get to all of those, but the project team will be capturing what's in the chat to address after the workshop, and again through our continued technical assistance with the online resource that will be available in the spring. And so I do want to get started with a round of introductions. And so for those who are the roundtable participants, I invite you to turn on your screen, and we're going to go in the order on my screen. And so I'll call out your name, and if you could please introduce yourself, just your name and affiliation, that would be great. And we will start with Caroline. And you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Hi, my name is Caroline Travis, and I'm with Highland Electric Fleets.
Thank you. James?
Hi, I'm James Filippo, and I'm a senior policy analyst at Atlas Public Policy.
And Danny?
Hello, my name is Danny Ilioiu. I'm with King County Metro. We operate transit in the Puget Sound area in the state of Washington, and I'm the Zero Emissions Program Manager.
Thank you. Brent?
Hi, I'm Brent Taylor, Assistant Commissioner of Citywide Fleet Operations and Sustainability Infrastructure for the City of New York.
Thank you. Candy?
Hi, I'm Candy Barworley. I'm with the Nevada Department of Transportation, and I'm the Division Chief for the Innovation Department.
Thank you. Matthew?
Hi, I'm Matthew Chen. I'm Director of Government Policy and Programs at Summit Connect.
And Robert?
Robert Jackson, Director of Michigan Energy Office. We oversee the state energy program as well as Charge Up Michigan, which is a program that looks at building out a DC fast charging infrastructure for the state of Michigan.
Thank you. Mike?
Mike Scarpino from the U.S. Department of Transportation's Volpe Center, and I'm here today representing Federal Highways Alt Fuel Corridor Program.
And the other Mike?
Mike Laughlin. I'm a technology manager at the U.S. Department of Energy's Vehicle Technologies Office and the Technology Integration Program, working for Mark Smith, who you've already heard from.
Thank you. And Alan?
Alan Westonsko, I'm the Director of Business Development at Proterra, make electric buses, do charging solutions for fleets, and do batteries for other heavy-duty vehicles as well.
Thank you. And Lindsay?
Hi, everyone. Lindsay Battenberg, Director of Government Relations and Public Policy, also with Proterra.
Shauna?
Hey, Shauna Vasquez, Energy Analyst and Communications Coordinator with the Tennessee State Energy Office, based out of the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation.
Thank you. Elena?
Elena Marco with DTE Energy. I oversee the EV programming here with DTE Electric that pays incentives and rebates for residential, commercial, and fleet owners and operators in our service territory.
Thank you. Colton?
Hey, Colton Brown of Pennsylvania's Energy Programs Office. I work with our electric vehicle programs.
Joe?
Oh, yeah, Joe Walton. I'm with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. I work with the TERP program and the VW mitigation programs.
Thank you. And Megan?
Oh, hi, this is Megan Lectura with EVBox. We manufacture chargers, everything from residential chargers to 350 kilowatt high range chargers. And we also develop the underlying software. And thank you for being here. Thank you for letting me be here. Sorry.
Thank you. And Dylan?
Hi, everybody. Dylan Tucker. I'm a senior program manager with NASEO, also working on transportation projects with Cassie.
Thank you. And my system was flawed since the boxes have jumped around on my screen. And so is there anyone who I missed? All right. Well, thanks again all for joining. And with that, I think we are going to get started with our first panel on fleets as anchor tenants. And so this session is going to take a look at the impacts and processes of electrifying fleet vehicles, talking about some of the anticipated electric system needs and some of the strategies that are being used to leverage consistent fleet vehicle charging to support the deployment, specifically in more DC fast charging infrastructure. And so we're going to invite the roundtable participants to chime in with questions, but we're going to get started with some presentations from some of our panelists. And so I'm thrilled to be joined by James and Caroline and Danny and Brent, who are each going to talk a little bit about different aspects of electrifying fleets. And so we're going to get started with James from Atlas Public Policy, who will give us some background and help to set a stage for our conversation. James?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here. As I said before, I'm James Filippo. I'm a policy analyst at Atlas Public Policy, which is a public policy and data analysis firm based in DC. And I specialize in transportation, electrification policy, and planning, and worked in medium and heavy duty electrification space, both here and at prior research roles. I'm gonna have to apologize. I think some wires got crossed on my end. So much of my presentation is going to be focused primarily on, or not as focused on fleets as I think we would like, but hopefully it'll give us some good context for this whole conversation. Some of you might be familiar with Atlas's EV Hub, which is our one-stop shop for all things EV, and my colleagues have been busy there tracking the transportation and electrification implications for the infrastructure bill and Build Back Better. But today I'm going to share with you a little bit of some recent work that Atlas has completed on medium and heavy duty vehicle infrastructure needs across the US and our experience with analyzing fleet electrification potential in Washington state. Can you all see my screen? Great.
Yes, we can.
So I think that these studies provide some useful information and direction to consider as federal monies appropriated in the infrastructure bill begins to flow out through states. Starting with this infrastructure assessment, this work was led by my colleague, Mckenzie, and it's the most comprehensive evaluation of infrastructure need and cost for medium and heavy duty vehicles completed to date. This study examined class 3 through 8 trucks and estimated the infrastructure commitment needed to support a path to full electrification, which we based on 100% sales targets in 2040. So we developed a tool, which we call Insight, that estimates the infrastructure need by simulating EV adoption, estimating the number and types of ports needed for each truck, and applying cost profiles for those charging infrastructure, including EVSE, site work, and where appropriate utility upgrades. And this tool will soon be released to the public and will be available to allow anyone to estimate charging needs for light, medium, and heavy duty on a state-by-state basis based on user-selected adoption curves, charging use parameters, and installation costs. We expect to release a beta of this tool in 2022, and we hope that it's helpful for states looking to understand where charging needs are or are going to be and inform how they think about spending infrastructure money. So this tool is based on, or this analysis is based on an adoption curve that aligns with a number of governmental, private, and NGO targets for electrification in the MDHD market, with a 50% sales target by 2030 and 100% sales target by 2040. And applying this curve results in the following pattern of EV stock growth across the country, where we reach 17 million electric trucks by 2060. We matched the charging types to vehicle class and location based on the estimated energy recovery needs and assigned charging types ranging from 10 kilowatt level 2 AC charging for smaller trucks with light duty cycles to large 2 megawatt DC chargers for on-route charging and long-haul trucks. We find to be on target to meet 100% sales goals in 2040, between 101 and 164 billion dollars in committed funds will be needed by 2030. This range reflects some uncertainty in utilization rates, percent of vehicles that can charge at depots, and utility cost share. Most of the needed ports will be at depots where trucks driving local and regional routes can return to each evening to charge. These ports are also the cheapest to install, and though we did not model usage costs, we also expect this will be the cheapest charging mode for energy costs. Due to space requirements and other constraints, we don't think all vehicles that operate out of the depots will necessarily be able to charge there. So we modeled two scenarios, one where 90% of the depot-based vehicles charge at depots, and one where only 75% of the time they're charging. So more charging at depots means more cost for depot charging. However, the trade-off is that it will reduce system costs for the overall charging infrastructure needs. Though they account for fewer charging ports, the on-road charging stations needed to support Class 8 long-haul trucks make up a majority of costs to electrify the medium and heavy-duty fleet. These vehicles require higher powered chargers to meet considerably more intense daily driving cycles, and these high-power equipment are more expensive than those at depots. Moreover, whether they are the large 2 megawatt stations that will rapidly refill truck batteries, or groups of 350 kilowatt chargers grouped in truck parking locations, high power requirements for these chargers will likely require customer-funded utility upgrades up to and including completely new substations, which will also take long lead times to plan, permit, and construct. Our takeaways from this study were that meeting the 2040 goal will require a very rapid ramp up of charging infrastructure, that right sizing equipment and prioritizing charging in depots can reduce required investments, ensuring high utilization rates by deploying in high use areas will reduce investment needs. We find that very high powered chargers are required to augment overnight charging for long haul trucks, that long utility and project lead times mean that, especially for infrastructure with high power needs, investment needs to be committed ahead of adoption and can be needed in as many as just 5 years in advance. Also, very high powered chargers can be cost competitive with overnight charging for long haul trucks if those chargers are highly utilized. Next, I want to turn attention to public fleet electrification in Washington State. This was a report we published last year in partnership with NREL and Washington State University, where we examined the total cost of ownership potential for EVs in Washington's public fleets. This analysis relied on our Drive tool, which is a free publicly available tool developed here at Atlas to enable fleet managers and other stakeholders to compare TCO, total cost of ownership, of EVs compared to gas and diesel vehicles. In this study, we found that most vehicles could be cost competitively switched to EVs by 2035. And the cost competitive of MD and HD vehicles is largely dependent on how costs evolve over the next several years. Though now buses are the kind of primary vehicle type that is prime for electrification. In the year since the publication of this report, we've seen new market entrants in other medium and heavy duty vehicles that are increasingly cost competitive. Lastly, we found that right sizing vehicle choices to duty cycle needs is an important way to control costs. So fleet procurement rules that limit vehicle choice can make this difficult. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to hearing from the rest of the panelists and the discussions that follow.
Thanks so much, James. I appreciate that. And yes, definitely appreciate the overview of kind of needs and where we are with medium and heavy duty electrification generally. I think it frames nicely the day's the discussions. And so we did have a clarifying question come through the Q&A, which I think we have time to address now. One of our attendees are looking forward to seeing the tool and are wondering how you arrived at 90 and 75% for the depot charging estimates.
So 90 and 75% were bookends of what we thought was reasonable based on conversations with fleet managers, our own evaluation of fleet depot sizes, and the availability of power initially. So there's a lot of different things that go into this. It's not going to necessarily be 10% or 25%. Those were conveniently appreciable figures, but they aren't heavily empirically based.
Got it. Thank you. All right. Well, we'll have time for more questions and to dig into this a little bit more after the rest of our panelists. And so I'd now like to turn it over to Caroline with Highland Electric to share a little bit about what's happening with the Highland Electric fleet. Caroline?
Great. Thanks so much, Cassie, for the introduction. Let me just pull up my presentation here.
And as a reminder, folks can feel free to send in questions through the Q&A or through the chat.
Okay. Let's see here. So thank you so much again, Cassie. I'm happy to be here today to share more about Highland, as well as our observations in the school bus electrification space. So just to provide a little bit more color on my experience, I serve as the lead for pricing at Highland and come from a background in public finance. Most recently, I was at the Massachusetts Port Authority, where I financed capital projects for the airport and for the port. So I'd like to focus our conversation today on 3 different areas. First, electric school bus market trends. Second, introducing the Highland business model. And third, challenges that we're seeing with respect to electric school bus adoption. There are a lot of exciting market trends underway. So there are a number of projects that are leading the way, including the Montgomery County project, which Highland is very pleased to be part of, where we're putting 326 electric school buses on the road over the next 4 years. So this is the largest school bus project in the country for electrics. And as you can see from this map, there are a number of dots showing that these are becoming more widespread across the country. And there are actually over 1,000 electric school buses that are either deployed or currently under contract. The next bucket relates to the availability of the product, as well as the reliability of the technology. And we're seeing all the major OEMs offering electric school bus products. And we're also seeing technology in the batteries, for instance, that permit over 90% of school bus routes to be met. And so these are 2 big things that are helping move forward school bus electrification. And then the next has to do with prices and incentives. So we're seeing over time electric school bus vehicles price declining, and that's being driven by declining battery costs, as well as scale that the manufacturers are achieving and competition. And then along the lines of incentives, we have exciting new federal incentives. States are either developing or have developed programs to support school bus electrification. And then there's also our commercial vehicle to grid development programs that are underway. So, we ask how we can achieve scale. These trends are great for school bus electrification in the country. But that said, when looking at how scale can be achieved, Highland really has identified 2 challenges, which are cost and complexity. And these are the 2 challenges and the tenets that formed Highland. And so we're set up to try and help solve them and allow for the conditions to actually get this product to scale. So to go into some of what we do, we evaluate the fleet that we're for the school district. So we'll look at their current diesel fleet, how we can help them electrify that fleet over time. We'll enter the competitive procurement process and hopefully be awarded the business to electrify the fleet. And then we offer a turnkey solution where the district is paying a per bus subscription cost that's affordable to them. And so this turnkey third-party solution is something that we offer districts that want to electrify. Just keep in mind that we are not providing the drivers nor the mechanics. Those continue to be the districts, but we do offer training on that. What we try and do is ensure that the district has a charged bus every school morning. And so our buses are chargers and your drivers and your mechanics. So then I'm going to talk a little bit more about the cost and affordability, how we simplify electrification. So that's that's the first tenet we had talked about. So we'll go ahead and plan the project with the district. We'll go to the depot, we'll look at where the charger should go, we'll work with the utility, we'll find the contractors, and we'll really try and simplify that process for the district. Second, we take care of financing all of the infrastructure. So we will pay the high upfront costs relating to buying the buses, buying the chargers, and all of the other costs associated with this undertaking. This is also can be a barrier, and we'll talk more about cost on the next slide, because it can be prohibitively expensive for districts to make that upfront infrastructure investment. Next, we'll go ahead and build the project and work with contractors to construct the depot and make sure that the project is on time and that buses can be deployed in line with the planned deployment schedule. As I mentioned before, we'll train the drivers, train the mechanics on the new technology, and then we take care of managing the charging needs so that the district has a charged bus ready to go in the school morning. And then over time, we maintain the fleet by reimbursing districts for the maintenance costs that they're going to incur. So kind of moving along to the next tenet, which is, how do we make this product affordable for the district? And so, as I mentioned before, there are high upfront capital costs associated with electrifying school bus fleets. So for instance, the electric school bus costs, about 3x what the diesel comparison would cost. And so that's pretty expensive, especially that's not kind of factoring in the other costs relating to electrifying. That said, we expect for there to be lower operational costs over the course of the bus being on the road. So that's both for fueling, and then that's also for kind of actually the maintenance. We expect these buses to last a long time. And then we also feel that Highland is well suited to optimize the various revenue streams that can be generated, whether that's through vehicle to grid revenues for programs that exist, as well as monetizing grants and future incentives, and kind of rolling this into a contract price for the district that makes it affordable. So outside of the cost and complexity, we're seeing other challenges to achieving scale. And so those include market education, incentive programs, and procurement. So I'll kind of start with market education. We've found that education can be a bottleneck, and we can actually spend a lot of our time with the prospective customers going through and educating them on the technology, educating them on how procurement would work, because it's different than procuring kind of the traditional standard diesel bus. What enables us to offer a budget neutral contract is by procuring for multiple deployment years and to take advantage of that riding cost curve decline. So to the extent that we can have partners in the federal government, state agencies, nonprofits that are kind of helping to get the information and trusted information out there, we think that would be super helpful. Another section relates to incentive programs and how they're designed. So, there's a lot of dislocation in the market with respect to vehicle prices, for instance. And in some places where this incentive programs vary quite a bit from state to state. And what we've seen is that in places where there are very generous incentive programs, sometimes that can mean that the cost of the buses go up as well. And so just being aware of those market dynamics and also creating an incentive program that would enable it to scale. So for instance, while free buses can be good for a pilot, that's really not something that we think is feasible to scale over time and really let the district electrify their full fleet. And so we recommend a subsidy that is a partial subsidy that doesn't fund the full costs, but instead partially subsidizes the project. We feel like that's the most scalable. And then also relating to procurement. So procurement also varies a ton from state to state in terms of kind of what is permitted and what is not permitted. As I mentioned before, we're making a big capital investment at the get-go. And so for our contracts to work, we have to have a life of a contract that is long enough to kind of align with the useful life that we expect of the bus so that we can recoup these capital costs over time. And for instance, some states have restrictions relating to how long the bus can be on the road or how long contracts can be entered into. So to the extent that procurement can be simplified and streamlined, that would be very helpful as well. So thank you so much for your time today. Look forward to hearing from all of you on how we might overcome some of these barriers.
Thank you so much, Caroline. And we do have just a couple of clarifying questions. I'm wondering, one of the attendees were asking, how long does an electric bus run? They say that a diesel bus lasts for about 20 years. What's the life expectancy for an electric bus?
Sure. So it really, we found that it depends a lot depending on where in the country you are. So for instance, on the East Coast, where you have, salt and snow and conditions that aren't as, as great for running a bus, we would say, call it 12 years, something like that, 10 to 12 years. On the West Coast, where you have better conditions, we would hope that it would last over 15 years. So, the batteries, from our understanding, are set to last a while, and especially because of the routes that school buses run. But I think there still is kind of more to come on that, but it really does have to do with the conditions and the climate of the area.
Great, thank you. Well, I think in the interest of time, we will move on to our next speaker. So a big thanks to Caroline, and we'll come back to a number of these points in the discussion. And so next, I'd like to turn it over to Danny with King County Metro Transit to share a little bit about fleet electrification considerations out west. Danny.
Yeah, hi, thank you very much. And, thanks for having me here. And I just want to spend the next couple of minutes giving you a little bit of a trip through our electrification program. So on the upper left-hand side, you see a project that we finished last year where we installed a gantry to charge 3 Proterra buses at the same time. We wanted to demonstrate that proof of concept, and we're very happy with the outcome. And we do operate 11 battery electric Proterra buses that we started bringing into the fleet a little over 5 years ago. So our goal right now is to transition our bus fleet to zero emissions by 2035. We have a strategic climate action plan that's been published, it's currently being revised, and a new one will be published either later this year or early next year. And we do realize that being a large transit operator in the Puget Sound area, we're also a large contributor to greenhouse gas emissions or other types of particulate emissions. We want to eliminate those by transitioning to a full zero emissions fleet. And that means a combination of battery electric buses and electric trolley buses. We currently have 1,600 buses in our fleet. About 12% of them are zero emissions. We have 14 battery electric buses, including 3 that we just received this year from an order that's going to add 37 more next year. So we do have some experience operating zero emissions buses, which makes it a little bit easier for us to transition. Unlike other transit agencies, which could be a little bit challenged by transitioning from a diesel fleet or internal combustion engine fleet, we have experience operating a small ferry system. We operate 2 small tram systems for the city of Seattle. They're very small. And then also Link Light Rail, which is sort of our local subway system, if you want to think of it in those terms. So we use that experience in order to develop our plans and train our staff. So how are we going to get to zero emissions by 2035? So we have 8 to 10 bases. This is our name for a depot or garage. And those 1,600 buses that I mentioned earlier are pretty much evenly split between 7 locations right now. However, we do expect some fleet growth over the next coming years, and that will be providing additional challenges in terms of additional locations that will have to receive charging infrastructure. For charging infrastructure, we're going to talk a little bit about that later. You're going to see how we are approaching this and what we are thinking about. We're also using heat maps such as the one you see on the left on this slide to align with our equity and social justice plans to make sure that when we deploy these zero emission solutions, we look at the neighborhoods that are most impacted by the current diesel hybrid operations. And we plan to displace those diesel hybrid buses with battery electric buses or eventually with electric trolley buses where it makes sense. A project currently in the pipeline that's fairly well along, and we expect it to be done by the first quarter of 2022 is what we call our South-based test facility. We understand that one of the industry challenges is equipment interoperability and compatibility. So in this project, we're deploying equipment from 3 different charger manufacturers, Siemens, ABB, and Heliox, both in the pantograph down solution, which you see on some of the pictures on the left, as well as some plug-in solutions, which some of you know as DC fast charging. Right behind that, there's another project that's going to be a small base for 120 buses. This contract has been awarded last month, and we'll plan to deliver a base that will charge about 90 to 96 buses simultaneously. So that's how many charging points will be available, or pantographs. And 2025 to 2027 is the completion date. We also realized that some folks have range anxiety, and with range anxiety with heavy duty transit buses that are similar to Class 7, Class 8 trucks, we might need to do some layover charging or en route charging. And currently we estimate that each one of our bases will probably need between 5 and 10 layover charging opportunities. These are places where buses already lay over, so these are natural fits. And in the slide in front of you, you're going to see a concept that shows how we could potentially charge up to 6 buses at one of these layover locations simultaneously with about 2.5 megawatts of power. For base power, we're looking at about 5 to 10 megawatts for 100 to 200 buses. So for those of you on the call that have customers that are interested in electrifying large heavy duty fleets, or for those of you on the call that do operate currently large heavy duty fleets and want to know more about what kind of challenges you're looking at, primarily the construction, the delivery methods, design build, progressive design build methods out there that may be more advantageous to you. Commissioning, that's kind of like proving out if the charging equipment and the vehicles that you purchase work with each other and if they do it seamlessly. You do want to work with the utility companies. We do have a partnership with Seattle City Light and another one with Puget Sound Energy, 2 of the 3 utilities that provide power in our service territory. And we're very happy that we have set up this partnership early on in the program, because it's been very easy for us to work with each other to get these programs delivered and to get the strategy developed. So your agency culture is going to be an issue, whether you're a utility or whether you're a fleet operator. Which groups do you involve, when and how much? How do you deliver these projects once you identify the locations? How do you set up the utility partnerships, and what do they mean? Who's responsible for what, and how do you communicate? How do you set that up? Training, obviously for my agency, it's a little bit easier because we operate electrical equipment. So we already have high voltage training in place. We know how to work with electrical equipment. The rest of our diesel fleet is actually diesel electric hybrid. So we already work with high voltage system. We retired the last straight diesel bus last year. You have to work with the manufacturers, and I saw Proterra on the call. I'm sure other manufacturers are online. So please take your time and work with the manufacturers to figure out if they're ready and if they're ready to deliver to the numbers and to the schedule that you're looking for. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to you. Thank you very much for your time. And I appreciate this opportunity to share our program.
Thank you, Danny. Appreciate the insights. We do have just a question on any on-site storage or generation that you might have used to offset the utility costs. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so currently at this time, we're not doing any on-site generation. We are working with various industry groups. So for those of you that are thinking about it, I know solar is a concept, on-site battery storage is another concept. However, there are some safety considerations, and just like when you put diesel fuel tanks on your facility or compressed natural gas tanks on your facility, or if you do fuel cell, if you want to do a fueling station. Each one of the solutions has some safety implications. And how you manage these solutions really becomes a big part of your ability to successfully transition your fleet to zero emissions. Right now, what we're trying to do is we're trying to look at the simplest possible solution set. Our utilities do a great job in the Pacific Northwest. They deliver power to us in a very stable manner. We did a study with them at the basis where we have the next couple of projects. We looked at stability and outages over the last 10 years. And I think the longest outage that we've identified was about 2 hours long. So the recovery time is also very quick. Because we're in part of the country where we have the stable grid, we're not really forced into that corner of looking for these type of resiliency solutions or microgrid solutions at this time. It's not off the table at all, and that may change over the next couple of years. But right now, thank you for the question. For some of you, it might be very important, and for some of you, it might be less important. Right now, we're just trying to push full steam ahead to transitioning our fleet to zero emissions, and that's where we want to focus all of our energy. And we want to kind of leave these other topics as peripheral topics at this point.
Great, thank you very much. All right, well then we will turn to our final speaker, Brent, with the Department of Citywide Administrative Services in the city of New York, to chat a little bit about what's happening in NYC. Brent. And Brent, if you're speaking, you may be on mute.
Perfect. Can you see the presentation, Cassie?
Yes, we can.
Terrific. Okay, so I want to just very quickly take you through the New York City electrification history, and then lead into where we are going into the future of our program, particularly in the medium and heavy duty space. So our electric vehicle history has extremely humble beginnings. People on the panel may recognize this RAV4. This car was the subject of a movie called Who Killed the Electric Car years and years ago, and Toyota, at the end of its life cycle, Toyota attempted to crush it, and a human chain of Californians protected the vehicle and would not allow Toyota to take it back, and it was subsequently donated to New York City to serve in our Parks and Recreations Department. Unfortunately, it got a big welcome to New York, and that seemed like it might be the end of our electric vehicle program for a while. But we did get it together and come back to an evolution of electric vehicles. We started obviously where everyone else did in the PHEV space, and we deployed PHEVs where we could, where agencies could operate them without any adverse effect to the mission or objective to the agency. As the technology adapted or matured, so did the fleet. And we started out with the most practical of all of the battery electric sedans, and then moved into more complex and cooler battery electric vehicles. Currently citywide, we have a program where the city shares about 500 PHEV and battery electric vehicles using Zipcar's technology on the vehicles in order to have a motor pool that spans across 60 some odd agencies. So really cool stuff in the light duty battery electric space. This is the evolution of the New York City fleet in terms of battery electrics, and we certainly need to update this as this will grow exponentially for fiscal year 22 when we're adding quite a few more battery electric vehicles to the fleet. Obviously, the maintenance costs have proven themselves over the years. No oil, no transmission equals a lot less in maintenance costs on daily averages with our BEV and PHEV fleets. And even the mayor got involved and put his money where his mouth was. And so across the street at City Hall, we have his PHEV minivan docked. He went one step further and signed Executive Order 53 in February of 2020, requiring the entire New York City fleet to go fully electric by 2040. So while the light duty fleet is an integral part of the city's fleet, it is just a fraction of the 30,000 vehicles that make New York City run on a daily basis. We have 8,000 heavy duty vehicles alone that service the New York City fleet. And these vehicles are all expected to go battery electric by 2040. So what are we doing for that? We are issuing specifications and bid solicitations for every vehicle in the fleet in a battery electric model. This, for instance, is a 16 cubic yard electric garbage truck for our Parks and Recreations Department, which was put out not some time ago. And the vendors will see these solicitations come out periodically and rapidly online from New York City. We want to make sure we're speccing battery electrics in every segment of our fleet. We're currently piloting the first 7 Mac 25 cubic yard garbage trucks throughout the city. We had one performing last year. It exceeded the manufacturer and the Department of Sanitation's expectations on it. So this year we will be strapping snowplows to the front of them and seeing how they perform in the New York winter, but we're very excited about their performance so far. We're also using PHEV hybrid ambulances where the cabins are powered by electric shore power. This has proven a very successful savings program for the FDNY, and also reduces the amount of diesel that the vehicles are spewing as they're required to idle all day long in order to keep the cabins cool. What are we doing to support this influx of electric vehicles throughout the city? We currently operate just over 1,000 charging ports throughout the city, most of those in the level 2 space. And we also do solar arrays. We have about 90 solar carports that also generate the equivalent of about a level 2 charging capacity. But over the past 2 years, we've started to supplement those 1,000 level 2s with DC fast chargers. Over the past 2 years, we installed just over 100 DC fast chargers. The program has gone extremely well, and over the next 2 years, we'll be installing just about 300 additional fast chargers throughout the 5 boroughs in order to support the electrification of the city's fleet. So that is the New York City program currently, and excited if there are any questions.
Thank you, Brent. And at this time, I'd like to invite the roundtable participants to feel free to turn cameras on and join. We're going to be entering the discussion portion of our session. I did want to kick us off with a little bit of a discussion around charging needs for medium and heavy duty electrification. And so I would love to turn to our EV charging station providers, Mega and Matt, to see if you all could offer any insights on some of the unique needs for charging for medium and heavy duty, and how those might compare to the charging needs of passenger vehicles. And Matt, I'm wondering if I could start with you.
Sure. Thank you. Zoom just crashed on me, but it looked like I rejoined successfully. So apologies for that. But yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. And, you know, SemaConnect has been kind of the second leader in the country when it comes to market share for level 2 charging. We've been in business over 10 years. We've just started getting into the DC fast charging space, and fleets are kind of another market segment that we're clearly very interested in. I saw some fleet vehicles displayed outside the US Capitol back in October, and it was really exciting to see the level of interest from federal policymakers who made their way down to look at those vehicles. One of the questions that we're kind of exploring is what is the role for high powered level 2 charging when it comes to fleet vehicles, and understanding that, we will need ultra fast and DCFC charging for continuous use vehicles, emergency vehicles, and so on. But, could there be a role for 80 amp 19.2 kilowatt chargers, especially for vehicles like school buses that might be able to charge overnight, don't necessarily, get called up at 3 a.m. And especially then looking at vehicle to grid applications, that's another area in which, we think high power level 2 has a role.
Great, thank you. And Robert, I know that you had a question for Danny, and you can feel free to build on this, but I want to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of layover charging versus induction and wireless. And I'm wondering if there's any additional context you'd like to offer.
No, I was kind of curious, and I know that Danny was talking about, charging the heavy-duty vehicles, at least the buses, for transportation. He had mentioned that there was some kind of the range anxiety, and I was just wondering, had King County Metro researched or did any cost analysis on the use of wireless or induction charging in addition to perhaps layover?
Yeah, thank you, Robert. It's a good question. In some of our areas, we operate in 39 municipalities in King County. So that means multiple permitting agencies. That also means that whenever we deploy any kind of layover charging infrastructure, we may have to deal with some issues of what do we have to displace that's currently underground. So for the solution set that I shared with you that we are pursuing at this time, which is overhead pantograph down, the amount of underground work is fairly minimal. It's basically just the duct banks that connect the power conversion equipment to the mast and the dispenser. Then we're in an earthquake-prone zone. So we have multiple seawalls, for example, in the city of Seattle, and other construction type challenges that make it difficult, because basically, if you look at what we do with overhead charging with pantograph down, if you do inductive charging at the same power levels, all of the equipment is about the same size. You just have to vault it, which means you have to dig big holes underground. You have to put these large utility vaults, put the equipment in those vaults, and then put the induction pad in the place where either your bus stop is or wherever your bus would be parking. So in terms of physical space or physical volume, the requirements are fairly close, not necessarily identical, but fairly close. So we looked at that technology with inductive charging. We looked at the power levels. We think the power levels are still a little bit low right now in terms of safety and certification issues. So again, we didn't think it was a good fit for our needs at this time. In the future, especially in areas where we operate buses on college campuses, where the protected right of way belongs to somebody that we can have a good partnership with, and we can actually build something jointly, those could be options. But at this point, we're staying with conductive charging as the solution and pantograph down. And I hope that answers your questions, but if not, please feel free to send me a note and I'll be more than happy to further elaborate on this.
Robert, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Yes, Danny, you did answer my question.
All right. And Shauna, and as a reminder, folks, you can feel free to raise your hand for those who are participating in the roundtable. Shauna?
Sure. I just wanted to kind of characterize the experience that we've seen from our transit providers with regard to wayside inductive versus overhead charging for transit fleets. Our Chattanooga Area Regional Transportation Authority, or CARTA, they operate a relatively new inductive wayside charger that they have installed at their depot downtown, and they have the vehicles run through on route, stay there for a few minutes and charge up. From what I understand, they're still in the data gathering process of this, because it's going to be a number of years before they totally know how to upsize those that type of a charging infrastructure for their use case. But from what I understand, it's been going fairly well. They've been partnering with some local universities there to complete some of that research, as well as I also believe with the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. I know that they, ORNL is doing a lot with examining the possibilities of inductive charging. So I do think there's definitely good news on the horizon in terms of the feasibility of that technology, at least for the transit use case. For overhead charging, we've also seen that deployed for a transit route in downtown Nashville from WeGo. That route does not currently operate, but I know that when it was operational, they had 2 overhead charging stations at different high traffic areas where they can pause with the buses, people can get on and off. You get 10 minutes of time and you're not, out in the middle of nowhere. You're nearby a bustling community, lots of people walking, lots of bigger trucks, maybe in certain places of our downtown area in Nashville, bigger trucks offloading cargo and equipment and beer and food and stuff for the restaurants and stuff downtown. And I know that there were occasions of damage done to the overhead charging equipment because a big old truck, offloading its cargo is not going to be able to see that big overhead charger, and there were occasions of that kind of damage. So I'm curious, obviously the inductive charging more expensive perhaps on the front end, but I'm curious like how different transit providers are looking at the vulnerability of the equipment, whether it's below ground or above, and how that is taken into account when designing these types of route decisions.
I can take that if you want to quickly. Okay, so prior to King County Metro, I was at New York City Transit. So we had equipment that was damaged by a car that hit a rollover barrier and smashed into one of the charging structures. The damage was primarily cosmetic. What we did over there, we worked with, in that particular case, that particular location, we had worked with Proterra. At a different location, we worked with New Flyer. These are both suppliers for large heavy-duty buses. In this partnership, we hired an industrial designer to design some outer enclosures that improve the visual aesthetics. But those enclosures also ended up providing some additional durability where the equipment was fully protected. So again, so there was a little bit of damage. It was cosmetic damage. It did not impact the ability of the equipment to operate. So that was pretty quick to get through. Over here at King County Metro, we had a situation similar to what you described, Shauna, which was we had a truck that tried to turn around and had difficulty negotiating the turn and knocked down one of the masts, or the mast that was used for charging at that time. And that took quite a few weeks to repair and restore to service. What that means is that, yes, each technology has its own challenges, but when you select the location for this equipment, you might be able to have some choices. You saw in some of my slides that we're looking at the gantry system. And the reason we're looking at a gantry system is because we deployed one successfully. It eliminates the single mast solution, and it provides with more flexibility in our garages and our bases, but also at layover locations where we can use a single gantry to span multiple lanes where buses can pull in. And then you really don't have to charge. You don't have to use that equipment to charge. So if a bus is double parked and you get to the charger, you don't have to do anything, because what initiates the charging sequence in our system design is the operator setting the parking brake. So if you don't set the parking brake and you sit there and you let passengers board on the light, as soon as you're done, you could just keep going and bypass the charging event, if you will. So yeah, look at your technology and see what the risks are and develop a risk mitigation strategy. And also we make assumptions about what is the approximate uptime. So if we deploy, let's say 75 charging points at layover chargers, we can assume that 10 to 15% of them are out of service at any given time, either because of mechanical or electrical failure, or because of a vehicle impact, such as the ones you described, or conflict, where maybe a truck stops to unload and the truck breaks down, and it takes maybe an hour or two before a tow truck can come and yank that truck out of the way so we can have access to the charger. So these are going to be part of how we learn about the technology and some of the challenges associated with it. And as we move forward, we're going to share our experience with folks such as yourselves. Every time you invite us to these meetings, we'll have more of these discussions and we'll have an opportunity to share what we've learned.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I definitely agree with the thought of redundancy, so that if one en route charger goes down, you're not totally stranded. I think WeGo was an earlier adopter of these types of electric transit buses for our region, and they only had one when they started. And when that one went down, the whole route went down for however long it took to fix the en route charger. So they added two. So thank you for that.
Thank you. We did have a question come in about just the trajectory of DC fast charging costs for medium and heavy duty infrastructure. I don't know if Matt or Meg or maybe James would like to comment on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear from Meg and James on this. I mean, briefly, what I would share is, currently we see install costs for, say, 120 kilowatt DCFC ranging from 30,000 to 70,000, again, for installation, versus for a 50 kilowatt charger, 15,000 to 40,000, and the equipment cost is totally separate. That can be 75,000 for 120 and around maybe 30 to 40 for a 50 kilowatt.
Yeah, this is Mega. I mean, yes, those numbers sound right. And I'd say that the cost of the charger, we make 175 kilowatt chargers go up to 350 because those are modular. Those are 50, 60 grand. That is the 175K. But mostly the cost of the charger, the cost of installation or so ends up could be 200, 300,000 for something of this high power. So the cost of the hardware is relatively low as compared to the other associated costs for grid upgrades and installation.
I would just add the role of the Section 30C federal tax credit for alternative refueling infrastructure, could have a significant impact with addressing some of these cost concerns, but of course Congress has to pass that.
I just add that those costs are fairly similar to what we used in the report I discussed at the start, and we've published what the costs that we used are on our website if you'd like to peruse those. But ultimately, as others in the call have said, it's the install costs that are often really high, and those are very site dependent.
Great. And Robert.
Yeah, I have a question for the EV charging equipment companies. Yeah, I agree with you in terms of your costs. We've done similar analysis, and that's what we're seeing too. Even for the light duty stations, we're averaging about 100. We're seeing 170,000 all at cost plus construction plus equipment for two 62.5 kilowatt chargers. And for the DC fast charging for heavy duty vehicles, we're seeing the same that you guys are projecting over 200,000. Here's my question. I know that this may not be the same kind of use case scenario that we see in light duty vehicles, but I was kind of curious for heavy duty vehicles. Do you ever see a need or a scenario where you would couple solar with battery storage with DC fast charging?
This is Megha. I'm not, since we sell the equipment, we don't get into the installation part of it. We are not very familiar with such use cases, but I see a tremendous value for them, especially with demand charges and other kind of rates that come up. If solar could offset part of the peak load or so, it could make a huge difference when it comes to the owner and the operator of the charger. So again, not my area of expertise. So, I apologize for that. But as I said, practically, theoretically, it makes a lot of sense. And it's something I would recommend to a customer if I were selling such a solution.
James?
Sorry, I need to unmute. I just wanted to add in a researcher plug here. And while those numbers sound are similar to what we've seen. The data on costs is pretty slim that's out there. And, as particularly as public agencies are looking to fund these things, putting, into those requirements, some cost reporting, some public cost reporting could very much help us in this space.
So I guess just to answer the speak to what you're talking about, James, that for us, we know these are actual costs because we're funding the installation with VW dollars, and our funding models is pretty much a three-way split. So the entire invoice comes to us, we look at it, and then we make a decision as to whether or not we're going to invest in a third. So we actually see the actual costs of each installation that we put in place within the state under our Charge Up Michigan program. And that's why I was saying that our numbers are dead on with your numbers. I mean, there's only slight differences, but on average, what we're seeing in terms of DC fast chargers, putting in 2 DC fast chargers that are rated at 62.5, it's about 170,000. Some of the highly urban areas that's in DTE or consumers territory. So, and we see the same thing for the heavy duty chargers too, at 300.
I think the question, I just want to make sure I understood the question was regarding solar and storage, regarding fleet charging, right? So,
yeah.
So Proterra, in addition to making electric buses and providing batteries for other heavy duty vehicles, we also have a business unit called Proterra Energy. And we sell all sorts of chargers, including a 1.5 megawatt charger that can charge up to 20 vehicles at a time at 75 kilowatts and 40 sequentially. So you can plug in 40 and you can charge the first 20 and then the next 20. But we view that as maybe as a central node for a microgrid project where you've got the generation and you've got the storage and you are controlling that. So we're currently working on a project that was announced a few weeks ago, was approved by the California Energy Commission for LADOT, that'll charge over 100 buses using 5 of those 1.5 megawatt chargers and using 1.5 megawatts of solar and I think 4.5 megawatt hours of storage. So, and overhead canopies that the charge will come down and they're kind of a dual purpose. So I just want to point out those things are happening. And we think that for, in terms of being able to manage charging, manage energy, there are ways. One of the things that's really cool with fleets is that you can actually shape your load curve a little bit, right? The vehicles come in, you have some extra time to play with to be able to decide when they're going to charge. And if you have that storage to be able to pull from, you can actually lower the overall demand. And so we think, not in all cases, but many cases, it actually can lower the cost. And in all cases, it provides some resiliency. So we are seeing that, and we think that that is something that'll be very much part of the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. I did want to turn to Helena at DTE to talk a little bit about some of the kind of grid impacts of medium and heavy duty vehicles, and would love just your insights on what utilities are doing to prepare for that and if there are any specific barriers that you're seeing.
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Cassie. So yeah, definitely with e-fleets being that you'd be looking at applications that have more of a centralized capacity into one site, which would require, a case-by-case analysis and right size in the investment and solution. So we had conducted a assessment of our circuit and distribution system and looking to understand where in clusters of adoption, how much can we accommodate the anticipated ramp up or a hockey stick of EVs coming to market. And when we looked at that, we could easily accommodate, or with the right, without having high cluster, under 500 kW capacity, we could accommodate about 20% of fleet adoption with the existing grid assets. But then again, it's not one solution, one size fits all. Is really sitting down with fleet owners and operators and looking to understand what are their operational needs, what does the journey to full electrification look like, what's actually available in the market, and how does it apply to specific, if you're putting 50 miles a day to 200 or 300 miles a day, that's definitely kind of tweaking the type of solution. And so with how we looked at our e-fleet program design, we specifically we worked with our industry kind of stakeholders and solicited input, and with our commission, and we put a component called advisory services, where we have dedicated consultants to exactly do that and do a comprehensive assessment of what these operational needs. A big component of that is obviously from a fleet operator is from a total cost of ownership, right? Does this make good financial operational sense to convert to electric when premiums are typically what we're seeing right now, 3 to 3.5 times more expensive? And then do you have, I guess, enough utilization of the high mileage, and making sure those investments are providing a net positive return on the investment, so that fleet owners can continue to focus and operate their business the best way they can. And so those are kind of the things that we're looking at internally from a utility perspective as we're looking to deploy specific fleet applications and use cases. We have defined what we see as a risk. We're looking at 200 kW capacity. Any applications that are coming in, if you're coming in with level 2 chargers that have relatively low capacity, you can probably deploy up to a certain amount. If you're starting at 7.2 kW, probably looking at 10 to 20 chargers concentrated without any major issues, infrastructure's upgrade. And in fact, out of the commercial program that we had deployed back in 2019, and we have about 1,000 level 2 applications now that we're seeing installations, we're seeing zero to minimal cost for any infrastructural upgrades. But then obviously, if you're starting to get to DC, direct current fast chargers at that 62.5 that Robert was mentioned before, and then the costs start to get significantly higher, then it's very easy to get to that 200 kW kind of minimum tier of how do we need to look at this and work with our distribution operations engineer to make sure we are designing the right cost-effective solution to get the proper investment on these deployments.
Thank you. And Shauna?
Sorry, I don't want to totally remove this conversation topic, but I do have a question for the panelists on resiliency. I know that when we're talking about the medium and heavy duty space, we start to get into emergency services and services for the public good, such as transit, ambulance, snow plows, garbage removal. All those types of things are in this space. And I know it's a major concern for fleet operators in these spaces to maintain operations, even in the case of bad weather, natural disaster, fuel shortages, all sorts of things like that. Of course, diversifying a fleet so that doesn't just include diesel and now includes electricity helps to kind of bolster resiliency. But for those that are going a bit further and going for 100% electrification goals in certain segments, how are the panelists kind of thinking about resiliency with that shift? And are there specific tools or solutions you are all keeping in mind to assist you planning for kind of those worst case events? One that comes to mind for me is mobile energy storage and mobile charging infrastructure. How are you all approaching that, and how are you working with your stakeholders to ensure a lack of service disruptions for some of these essential services?
I think the fleets would like to weigh in.
I could
Brent?
probably help out with this one. So this has been fairly top of mind for the city as we transition to an all-electric fleet. Obviously, it's the first thing that the New York Police Department asked about. This is now a public safety issue. And we experienced something similar in terms of resiliency during Hurricane Sandy, where our Buckeye fuel terminal was inoperable, and it was the biggest fuel crisis that New York City had ever had. And thank goodness that just happened to be an election year, and so we got help by the Defense Logistics Agency. But in other ways, what we're doing now is in terms of electrification and resiliency there, we've met obviously with our stakeholders in the EVSE space who have the citywide contracts, going through playbook scenarios in case of network outages, in case, how do we turn each one of the stations onto a manual sort of designation where we don't need to swipe fobs in front of it. The chargers will just free flow electricity. We'd rather have our fleet have complete unimpeded access to them than worry about the general public sneaking up and using them. That's not a big concern of ours. We also have a resiliency playbook of where we install the chargers, say at a specific sanitation garage where we can put them on the 5th floor in the event that there's a major flood that comes through Lower Manhattan, and we have heavy duty access through the doors, so we can basically use the fast chargers to as a kind of pit stop for all agency vehicles to come in. We keep a record of every diesel generator that every one of our fast chargers is tied into for a resiliency playbook in the event of a power outage, whether it be flooding or whether it be electrical that goes down. So it continues to evolve. The NYPD will be purchasing 200 battery electric vehicles over the next month. And some of those will be patrol rated vehicles, so they will be actually policing out on the streets, which is a new thing for battery electrics in New York City. So it will continue to evolve, and we meet with the uniform agencies constantly on this issue. But the mobile solutions now are extremely rudimentary. We find, the little kind of free wire device. It's cool, we have one, but we are looking for more robust things from the manufacturers. We'd love to see a flatbed truck with a lithium battery on the back of it that can roll around. And if any of the 200 participants are out there building one right now, please get in touch with me. We're very interested in it. And that's it for New York.
Hey, Brent, we also had a question come in about the decision to make DC fast chargers publicly available or not. And so I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to the city's decision to either keep fleet charging private or public.
Yeah, we just finished an install of about just over 100 DC fast chargers to complement the 1,000 level 2 chargers we have. The New York City, as I'm sure plenty of the other urban environments, our big challenge is accessibility to the city, to pedestrian and civilian vehicles. If a car pulled into one police plaza to use one of the fast chargers, they get a kind of rude surprise at the entrance there. So, but where we can deploy charging stations for the general public, we have, and those are going to be in our parks, our beaches where we have chargers deployed. In my presentation, there was a picture of a couple out in a beach in Staten Island. And those are where we open up to the general public. What we want to be very careful of is that we don't turn a profit on those chargers. All we want is for the individuals to reimburse the city for the peak or off-peak price of the power that they're using. But in that same token, we don't want to discourage the private sector from investing in New York City. We don't want to compete with Electrify America or Revel or whoever it may be that's building out their own EVSE infrastructure for revenue. We encourage that, so we don't want to undercut anyone. So we kind of level it off there. But given our real estate issues and the fact that most of our parks don't have the requisite power to run DC fast charging, we're kind of landlocked a little bit on what we can do for the general public.
Got it. Well, the comments on resilience made me think a little bit too about vehicle availability and accessibility. And we're certainly in a constrained era, not a lot of vehicle availability, period. There's some constraints on the supply chain as well. I'm wondering if I could turn it to Alan or to Matt or to Mega to chat a little bit about the prospects for vehicle availability and the supply chain availability. Not all at once.
I can start, Mega, and I'll talk strictly from the perspective of chargers, because that's what I know. But yes, there is, I mean, the supply chain shortage isn't going anywhere. Most companies right now, if you're looking at buying chargers, are completely back ordered, and it's not only chips, but a number of other components in the chargers, particularly in DC, are very difficult to find, including critical components like transformers and some of the conductors as well. So that's a situation, and with current geopolitics also, we don't see escalations happening. We don't see that situation getting any better very soon. So from the perspective of chargers, there could be a shortage also, at least in the first half of next year, is likely, is what I can say.
Yeah, happy to add to that. And I mean, I completely agree with Mega there. And, on the DCFC side, with some suppliers, we're seeing delays that could extend 11 months in some cases. And, we certainly see risks to semiconductor supply as one of the biggest issues we have. And there are others around cables for the contactor and relays for the J1772 cable for level 2. In some cases are not US suppliers for this, and that enters a whole nother realm of policy around Buy America provisions that the federal government is pushing. And I'll stay neutral in that regard, but it does have an effect on us. And then the other thing too, of course, is around tariff policies and like Mega was saying, the geopolitics of how we negotiate those as well.
Thank you. And Alan and Lindsay, are there comments from Patera on this?
Sure. I mean, it's kind of separate issues for if we're talking about transit bus versus chargers versus batteries. I'd say though, overall, at least on the transit bus side, we've actually been able to mitigate a lot of the supply chain issues. Happy to report that. I think it's also another, reason why, Buy America provisions and having domestic manufacturing is important. But like others have said on the charger side, definitely seeing some delays there and a little bit of a backlog. Anything to add on that, Alan?
Oh, I think you covered it well.
And Maria.
Maria Redmond here from Wisconsin. We are part of a Midwest effort involving 5 states called Rev Midwest. And one of the things that we are aiming to do as part of that effort is to look at the opportunities, economic opportunities, to elevate manufacturing and supply chain opportunities in the Midwest as it relates to medium duty and heavy duty vehicles and infrastructure. So that's something that we will be looking to focus on and look at those opportunities to expand and support the deployment of electrification of transportation.
Thanks, Maria. And Mike?
I just wanted to mention, since the topic has come up a couple of times here on Buy America, that DOT and DOE issued a joint request for information on Buy America. I think it was the 24th, the day before Thanksgiving. Comments are due on January 10th. So they're interested in gathering public and private entities' input on how we will achieve Buy America compliance when installing a national electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So take a look at that Federal Register notice if you haven't.
Thank you, Mike, and great to see the RFI. I also just, in the last few minutes of this session, wanted to come back to something that Caroline had mentioned, just the importance of education as one of the primary barriers to widespread medium and heavy duty adoption. And wondering if I could turn to Mike Laughlin to just talk a little bit about some of the work from the Vehicle Technologies Office and specifically around the issue of addressing these education gaps, but anything else that he'd like to flag in the context of the discussion. Mike?
Sure, absolutely. Yes, certainly one of the hallmarks of the Technology Integration Program in the Vehicle Technologies Office and it's on our Clean Cities Coalitions is education. A lot of what we are doing is meant to educate fleets, meant to educate the general public on the availability of these technologies, their characteristics, the good, the bad, and the ugly, as we often say. One of the things we're working on right now that will hopefully get done here sometime next year is some specific education around electric school buses. We're trying to meet that need where, we've certainly heard from the National Association of Pupil Transportation that that's an important area that we need to work on. So we're working on some great resources for that. And certainly our alternative fuels data center, AFDC for afdc.energy.gov. If folks are not familiar with that, has a wealth of information, a lot of educational materials on every alternative fuel for medium, heavy duty, light duty, certainly you name it, and also our Clean Cities coalitions across the country, 75 of them that cover about 80% of our nation's population. They're a great source of information, a great source of education, and can certainly help fleets, or happy to help fleets with the tools and resources that we have available.
Great, thank you. And so we are just about at the end of the time for this session. So just wanted to thank our speakers and to all those participating in the roundtable for the discussion. We did get a lot of questions coming in through the chat that we were not able to address. So just a reminder that we'll be collecting those and can follow up following this discussion. But we are going to take a short break, about 10 minutes, and then we will resume for our next session on freight electrification. So we'll see you soon.
Thank you all.
Hi, Dylan. This is Morgan from Long Beach. Can I do a quick mic check?
Hi, Morgan. This is Cassie. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure thing. Glad you can join.
I in the right place?
Good afternoon, Amy. Yes, you are. And I think
Okay,
with that,
I just want to make sure.
no, thank you for checking. And I think with that, we will go ahead and end our break. So thank you all and welcome back to NASEO's State Electrification Workshop on medium and heavy duty vehicle electrification. We just concluded a great conversation about transit and fleet vehicle electrification and are now going to transition to a session talking about freight and port electrification. And so we are joined by a number of speakers who are going to provide some information on what efforts are currently underway to reduce carbon emissions and other air pollution in the freight, the sector, with special attention being given to air quality impacts near ports and other communities that are disproportionately burdened by freight traffic. And so I'm delighted to be joined by a number of panelists who will help to kick off our conversation by presenting some good information. And then, like the last session, we will transition into a conversation with the states, federal partners, private sector partners, and others who are participating in the round table to kind of dive into some of the discussion questions. So with that, let me introduce our panelists. I'm delighted to be joined by Amy Goldsmith with the Coalition for Healthy Ports and Morgan Caswell with the Port of Long Beach, and Mackenzie Eldridge with Schneider Electric. And so I'll let each of you introduce yourselves as you are giving your presentations, but I think we'll go ahead and get started with remarks from Amy. And so Amy, I will turn it over to you.
All right, thank you so much. So I'm Amy Goldsmith. I'm the New Jersey State Director for Clean Water Action and Clean Water Fund, and I'm on the steering committee of the Coalition for Healthy Ports. I'm also part of a much larger national network called the Moving Forward Network, and we work with port communities throughout the state and the country. And we represent and put equity and justice and accountability and community voices at the center of our work. And we seek zero emissions, clean air, good jobs that are safe and family supporting jobs, local work as we have a green economy emerge, and healthy communities. And the main geographic focus that I work in is in the New York, New Jersey area with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. So my frame of reference is from the East Coast, the largest port on the East Coast, where 75% of the goods stay within about 70 miles or so of the port. 75% of them are moved by trucks, and they're mostly moved by independent owner operators who make about $28,000 a year once they've paid for their expenses. So trying to put clean air on the backs of low-wage drivers is not a winning strategy to get to where we want to go. So I want to talk about what might be some options to make that happen. The port, one thing to think about is that the port is not just within the fence line, it extends outside the fence line. We bring goods from wherever they're produced to a ship in many cases that travel all around the world. They go to the ports, they end up on trucks or on trains. For New York, it's mostly trucks as opposed to some of the other ports where they send things out into the Midwest on rail. And the goods move on trucks in port adjacent communities that are overburdened by many pollution sources, but the port included in that. So, and then we have to look at it going all the way to the warehouses where, New Jersey, which is known as the Garden State, is rapidly becoming the warehouse state. Amazon now is the #1 employer in New Jersey. And there's a lot of fighting back on these warehouses, which are impacting communities and traffic and pollution and the like. So we need remedies to these things, and zero emissions is part of that, but it's not the whole thing. So I wanted to just again reiterate that the ports are not just in the fence line, it's what happens as the goods move, and we all want our goods to come to us, whether it's in the store or at our doorstep, right? So some of the opportunities for us to think about kind of fall into a number of buckets. And then I'm also going to talk about sort of the planning and community interaction, which was one of the questions that was raised for me to bring up. So on the technology side, there's been a lot of conversations in some of the other sessions, so I'm not going to go into any of the details of it, but there's obviously electric trucks, whether they're the yard tractors, the cargo handling equipment, the cranes, the drayage, but there's also, as was a lot of conversation earlier, about mobile storage, which is really important because our ports are going to all be underwater. So you don't want to be building infrastructure that you can't move. It's just way too expensive. And for ships, there's, cold ironing, but there's also capture and control, pollution control devices that should and could be used. For us, we're big advocates of fleet buys, as opposed to having individual drivers have that burden, and to have both public, on the road infrastructure, but also private depots, or like Red Hook Container Terminal. They have, it's almost embarrassing to say this, but the largest EV fleet of port vehicles is 10, and it's at Red Hook Container Terminal in Newark. So we're very proud that Red Hook Container Terminal did that. I used Volkswagen money to do it, but 10 is not a very big number when our port has 20,000 trucks that go in and out of the port every single day. So that is not, a path for success. So we need to do more. Money is obviously a big issue, right? So there's lots of issues of equity and justice. There was issues raised earlier about, you can't even use the money if you're not doing Buy America Steel and some other things, that challenges we have to overcome. There's CMAQ money, there's DERA money, there's infrastructure money now, there's Build Back America money, there's RGGI money in the New England area. That includes New Jersey. There's Volkswagen money, which we've pretty much used up in New Jersey. There's also economic development authorities have this money. And for us, we have a board of public utilities that actually is building some of the infrastructure in their rate base and pricing. We want to make people and corporations who have the money, like the Amazons of the world, to actually pay for their trucks. And we want, shipping companies and terminal operators who are making money off the goods that are moved to pay for these things. Right now, almost all of the money to date, especially at the port, it's been public money, and the public shouldn't have to pay for everything. So we know that Walmart, in 2007 replaced all their trucks with 2007 engine trucks. Why? Because they were more efficient. Why? Because they saved fuel. Why? Because 3 years later, they were going to sell them on the market to somebody else to fix them after the warranty was out. So we know that these big companies can spend the money. So on planning, this is a really important thing, and planning goes with accountability. So better outcomes always come when you engage the community in them. Right now, we're fighting an Amazon warehouse at the Newark airport. Why? Because the Port Authority is doing a secret deal with Amazon. They never talked to the community. They haven't talked about what's going to happen with the roads, with all the trucks that go in and out of there. And a whole variety of other issues, worker safety issues and the like. So we've always seen better outcomes when the community's been engaged. Community means people who live in the community. It doesn't mean public officials. Public officials are not the community. And I just want to emphasize that, because a lot of times elected officials get on, in a work group or in a session, but they're not the community. They have very different interests, and I'm not going to go any further than that. So, working behind closed doors, you can't do it. Meetings at night are a must. Invite, really listen, be genuine, and actually, really negotiate with the community. These are all things that are really critical to getting to zero emissions, which is what people want. And again, think about the whole logistics chain, not just, what's in the fence line. The other thing is that there's accountability, and there's a bunch of mechanisms to do that. And this is where I'll close my remarks, is that The tools that are available are varied, and some of them are actually in the hands of the Port Authority. In our particular case, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. They have a tariff agreement that they have used in the past. Originally, they were going to institute a ban on all pre-2007 engine trucks, which are the cleanest you can get on a diesel for diesel particulates. And then just months before that was supposed to go into effect in 2017, I use the word renege, they would use a different word. They abandoned that policy, but it was in their tariff agreement and it was approved by their Port Authority board. So it is a mechanism, and they are using it to much slower effect to change over and tier 2 engines with tier 3 and 4 engines. And so using a tariff agreements with terminal operators is one vehicle. Another is, the advanced clean truck rule and the cargo handling rules and the omnibus rules on NOx. These are all mechanisms to either increase sales or send a signal to the market. That's important. Community benefits agreements with the community. If you want to build something and you want to expand something, then you got to do something, give back to the community. You have to mitigate the air pollution, whether it's air filters in the school or zero emission corridors, zero emission zones. These are things that we're talking about in New Jersey. Applying the indirect source review to ports and warehouses. They've been doing that in California. They're starting to use that. We'd like to use that here in New Jersey. Have actual mandatory reductions so that you can actually make the path for zero emissions in the future. And the other is to, government should be held, should be accountable to the public, not to, let me put it this way. Our Port Authority considers their constituent, the shippers and the movers of trucks and the terminal operators. Their constituent really should not be them alone or them at all. It should be to the public. So making sure that when we're talking about government accountability, it's actually the government is accountable to the public and to the public health and to the costs that are incurred to the public with their health, with their lives. And we need to be collecting data, monitoring data, releasing that data, being transparent about the data so that everybody can understand and be part of a conversation. So again, coming back to this issue of planning, you plan with the community involved. The community can't be involved if they're not informed or given information that they can interpret themselves, as opposed to a Port Authority or somebody telling them what they should accept. And to be honest, at our Port Authority, while there might be very good intentions in some cases, they've not always delivered on zero emissions in the way that we would like them to. And hats off to Red Hook Container Terminal, who actually took it on themselves to build that infrastructure and to make that happen. And we're proud of the work that they did, and we were there for the announcement. But the port authorities could be doing much more, and as could the states, to get zero emissions to move faster, quicker, and in a way that is mindful of the community more directly. So I'm going to stop there. I'm sure I've created lots of thoughts, but California, has done many things to move the needle, and has piloted many of these zero emission technologies. And so we don't have to start from scratch on the East Coast. We can take from what lessons have been learned, and things that work and things that don't. So we don't have to start from scratch here. And so it gives us a great jump start, and we should take it. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Amy. And on that note, we will turn to our partners in California to hear a little bit about what's happening. The Port of Long Beach. I will just do a reminder that folks can feel free to submit questions via the chat or the Q&A. And so with that, I will turn it over to Morgan.
Awesome. Dylan was going to upload the slides. Perfect. Thank you so much.
And Dylan, you were in the presenter mode. Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Good morning from the West Coast. My name is Morgan Caswell. I'm the manager of air quality practices for the Port of Long Beach. So I'm leading the team on the Long Beach side to implement our clean air strategies. Next slide. So just some background about the Port of Long Beach. The port is a major economic engine for the region, state of California, and the nation. We are the second busiest seaport in the United States. The port handles approximately $100 billion worth of cargo each year. Port-related trade supports 1 in 5 jobs in Long Beach, 1 in 20 jobs in California, and about 2.6 million jobs throughout the United States. The port is the harbor department for the city of Long Beach. We are considered a landlord port, meaning we lease out the land to terminal operators. This is important to note in this context because we don't own or operate any of the equipment, vehicles, or vessels here at the port. Next slide. This economic success does come at a cost to our environmental and community health. The port acknowledges that we have a disproportionate impact on our neighboring communities. That's why in 2006, the Port of Long Beach and our neighbor, the Port of Los Angeles, released the first Clean Air Action Plan, which outlined our strategies to secure emission reductions from our operations. This plan targets our 5 source categories, including cargo handling equipment, hovercraft, locomotives, heavy-duty trucks, and ocean-going vessels. Since 2005, we have reduced diesel particulate matter by 90%, nitrogen oxides by 62%, sulfur oxides by 97%, and greenhouse gases by 10%, all the while container throughput has gone up 21%. This plan was updated in 2010 and again in 2017. The latest, we call it our CAP update, includes our most ambitious goals yet. In the 2017 CAP update, the port made the commitment to transition to zero emissions cargo handling equipment by 2030 and to zero emissions trucks entering and exiting the port by 2035. The ports are not mandating a particular technology pathway. We are technology and fuel neutral. Next slide. So how do we support this transition? One of the first critical steps for us was the development of a roadmap, and we were very fortunate to receive a $200,000 grant from the California Energy Commission to develop the nation's first port community electric vehicle blueprint. We call it the EV Blueprint, and it identifies the concrete actions and milestones needed to implement and sustain an EV-ready community encompassing the Port of Long Beach and nearby visitor serving areas. Through active engagement and input from diverse stakeholders, the EV Blueprint addresses opportunities to dramatically accelerate adoption of zero emission on and off-road equipment. Notably, although it is called an electric vehicle blueprint, it also includes hydrogen. Next slide. The blueprint focused mainly on terminal equipment and trucks and the associated charging and fueling infrastructure. We also evaluated employee cars and those visiting tourist areas near the port. 5 main categories were analyzed, including infrastructure, technology, community, workforce, and finance. Next slide. When I say terminal equipment or cargo handling equipment, I want to make sure we have a common understanding of what we're talking about. There are approximately 1,454 individual pieces of cargo handling equipment at the Port of Long Beach. Yard tractors, rubber tire gantry cranes, top handlers, as well as forklifts make up about 78% of our equipment. This equipment supports stacking of containers and movement of those containers from the ship to other locations within the terminal, ultimately destined to leave the port on rail or on truck. It's important to note that this equipment is used in significantly more energy intensive duty cycles than other applications such as warehouses and distribution centers. This equipment needs to pull containers, which can weigh up to 80,000 pounds nonstop for a full 8 to 10 hour shift. We are currently testing out zero emissions cargo handling equipment in all of these categories. We've successfully applied for and received a little over 70 million in grant funds, including the demonstration of 63 pieces of zero emissions cargo handling equipment and trucks, 4 near zero trucks, hovercraft technologies, as well as vessel technologies. Next slide. Well, we won't have time to get into all of the findings of the EV blueprint today. I want to share a major finding with you that aligns with our discussion of planning. The EV blueprint identified a significant need for zero emissions infrastructure master plans at the terminals. To date, we have installed infrastructure to support demonstration projects at our container terminals, but more extensive planning to support a much larger transition is needed. The port already has a well-defined process of working with terminals on design plans, but we have not started this effort on a comprehensive scale for zero emissions. These plans will include equipment specifications, operational configurations, site layouts, rough order of magnitude costs, schedules for infrastructure rollout, and equipment deployment. We also need to consider resiliency and cybersecurity, which is expected to become a more significant issue as terminals switch to equipment that requires smart metering and demand management software. The Port of Long Beach has recently received a notice of proposed award from the California Energy Commission to develop our first zero emissions infrastructure master plan for a major container terminal. Next slide. Finally, I would be remiss if I did not mention our recently released public truck charging and fueling assessment. In this study, we outline the opportunities and challenges associated with deploying public infrastructure near the Port of Long Beach, with a heavy emphasis on public truck charging. We also developed a framework to evaluate sites for their potential for public truck charging, and a detailed analysis of sites available at the time of publication is provided as well. It is our hope that this assessment can be used as a starting place for other seaports interested in pursuing public truck charging or fueling infrastructure near the port. And for us, it will kickstart a process to identify locations where we could ourselves work with a third party to bring in public charging to serve zero emission trucks. Next slide. And with that, that concludes my brief presentation. Certainly looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Morgan. That was very helpful. We did have a question come in. Just wondering if there's any information on what happened with the E-Highway electric truck catenary wires that were between the Port of Long Beach and the Port of LA.
So that project actually precedes my time at the port, but my understanding was that it was cost prohibitive, and it was unclear who would bear the burden of the additional infrastructure that would need to go in to support that project. But I could certainly check back with our technology team. Some folks on that team were actually around during the time of that project, and we can get some more detail on why that project did not move forward.
All right, well, thank you very much. And so we'll turn to our third and final speaker, Mckenzie with Schneider Electric. Mckenzie.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me and see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me today. My name is Mackenzie Eldridge. I am an e-mobility specialist on Schneider Electric's electric vehicle infrastructure team. Brief background on me. I have an electrical engineering background, passed the electrical power professional engineering exam in the state of California in 2019. And I am here today to talk about my experiences developing the charging infrastructure for medium duty and heavy duty electric vehicles through sort of a general example project, as well as a project currently in progress at the Port of LA, Morgan's neighbors. So first of all, I I will start with an overview of the electrical infrastructure needed between the vehicle charger and the utility. A lot of times people will think about, spend a lot of time up front on the specifications of the vehicles and of the chargers themselves, with not necessarily a lot of thought or understanding as to what is behind that actually provides this massive amount of energy needed for these large vehicles. So for here, I know we had some questions in the earlier session about moving into alternative energy resources and how that and storage could be incorporated. So from here, we have the utility connection, which is transmitting at a medium voltage, typically 4160 volts or above, which then needs to be stepped down. Then the energy control center here, Schneider product, it monitors both the utility and the distributed energy resources, as well as things like the weather to properly predict, when those are going to be online and when they might not be producing as much. There's also energy storage, in this case in the form of a battery electric stationary system that is used to offset some of the valleys in the electricity production and offset utility demand and time of use charges. So this particular project is for, just to give some context on the rough order of magnitude for equipment sizing, this customer has 38 battery electric vehicles, and they wanted the ability to charge all of them at full power at the same time. Quick aside, fully rating like this is not going to be necessary for most applications. There's typically enough variance in truck idle time to spread out the charging a little bit, not to mention the charging management or load management software that can be included to just sort of have a more smart automated response to that. A charge management system is included in this block diagram just as an option in case of future expansion, because as was mentioned earlier, going to need a lot more than 38 trucks to fully transition fleets. So with those 38, with those discussions, the sizing is roughly a 3,000 kilowatt or 3 megawatt backup generator as one of the options, or a 750 kilowatt rated at AC, so after it's already been through an inverter, solar photovoltaic system with a 1,000 kilowatt rated 3,000 kilowatt hour battery energy storage system. So pretty big. Just to give a light commercial comparison, I typically see BESSs rated around 40 to 100 kilowatts for 6 chargers at sort of like the high end of level 2 charging. So a few orders of magnitude greater for this. But as I said, that there is room for expansion and room for improvement in efficiency. So next, I'd like to speak a little bit more about the project that I'm currently working on at the Port of Los Angeles in conjunction with several other companies and entities. So Schneider Electric is part of an engineering resource collective called Aspire, and in conjunction with Cummins, Wave by Idea Economics, Utah State University, and Total Transportation Services, also known as TTSI. We are working to install a wireless charging station at the port for a Class 8 battery electric vehicle. The electrification of drayage trucks is a use case that we're very interested in, especially with this sort of charging topology and power ratings here, just because there's a lot of buzz around long haul, medium duty, heavy duty trucking and the power requirements needed for that. That is a much larger problem to solve for than the drayage vehicles with relatively short routes. So, and what is great about all of this in inductive charging, you don't have some of the issues that were mentioned earlier with driving into the charging stations, for example, or having to train operators on that equipment for charging. You just have to align it over the pad and you're good to go. So first stop, utility connection. As we saw in the previous slide, utilities typically transmit at medium voltages, higher medium voltages. This was an iterative process with LADWP. My advice here would be to engage early and often with the utility and relevant stakeholders in order to determine the exact requirements up front. Since this is still a relatively new space, there are a lot of constantly evolving requirements in terms of metering, sub-metering, and just sort of other equipment specifications. One advantage of the Utah State University's unfolding technology is that it operates with a medium voltage input. So eliminating the need for the large medium voltage transformer to step it down to the 480 volts you typically see for fast charging applications. So this simplifies the interconnection and eliminates cost and footprint on site. So here we have Schneider Electric's medium voltage control center called a motor pack is being used as a primary means of disconnect. And then the unfolder and DC-DC conversion modules are inside this, this mock-up of a container. Not going to have quite the same fun colors on site, but it helps to see in the slide. So the USU module is rated for 620 kVA and consists of the unfolder unit that I mentioned that conditions the incoming power, rectifying it to DC for 7 converters that are connected in series. The converters are 80 kilowatts each for a total unit rating of 560 kilowatts. This translates at 900 volts DC. This translates roughly to a charging time, full charging time of 20 minutes, which is very, very impressive given the size of that battery. So yes, the 900 volt DC 560 kW goes over here through the charging pad, through some power electronics. The pad embedded in the ground has a partner receiver pad, which Cummins is working to integrate, or which Cummins has integrated into a Class 8 Kenworth T680 day cab battery electric truck. So this, I think inductive charging is neat. That's why I chose to share this project. But again, the power considerations and the power distribution consideration of upstream of this is going to be similar, whether it is inductive, conductive, whatever form. And the utility considerations are also going to be the same. So I hope that that example was helpful, and I look forward to questions and further discussion.
Thank you, Mackenzie, and thanks to all. We'll be entering the discussion portion of the session. So Roundtable participants encouraged to do cameras on and jump in. Again, feel free to raise your hands if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment. Also feel free to just unmute to jump right in. And Mackenzie, we did have just a couple of clarifying questions to get us started too. And you did address this a little bit, but I'm wondering if these trucks with wireless charging are OEM products or if the inductive charging unit is a retrofit for fleets.
So there are options for both. The one we're working on with Cummins is fully integrated into it, and they are looking to ramp up production with those shipping straight from it. There are a couple of different companies, Wave that I mentioned, part of the Aspire ERC, as well as a company out of Pennsylvania, I believe, called Momentum Dynamics that has a similar product. And with that one, they can be retrofitted. So I've seen that a lot in EBUS applications and other sort of medium duty, heavy duty. So the answer is both.
Gotcha. We did also have another question come in. I know we had a lot of discussion around drayage vehicles, but what is the outlook for batteries for long haul heavy duty trucks? And when will those battery long haul electric duty trucks be available? Mackenzie, if you'd like to start, please do. And others on the panel, if you would like to share some insights, please do.
Sure. For long haul, a lot of what I have seen about that and heard from that, even with the option for hydrogen for a bit more energy density to help you go a little bit farther. That's the sort of technology that's been 5 years away for the past 10 years, 15 years. So still working on that one. I believe that there are other ways to address the long haul things such as trains, some sort of high-speed rail, a whole lot of other things. I would say that that is still probably going to be several years out for it being widely available, just due to current material constraints and trying to ramp up battery production for even just consumer vehicles and all sorts of other EVs. So yeah, I'd say still a few years out on that.
I would just say, you know, for a place like Port Newark and New Jersey, given that things are hauled relatively short haul for almost all of the goods that leave the port, you know, going to battery and going to zero emissions vehicles is really, the benefits are tremendous when you consider, you know, it's a health impact for basically, you know, 18 million people between New York and New Jersey alone, no less, you know, the corridor that goes up to Connecticut and out to Philly. I mean, most of these trucks, they barely go to Allentown, Pennsylvania. You know, they're not going very far, but the impact is tremendous. And the other thing is that port trucks are the trucks that, you know, these are the trucks that go to die at the port, right? Because they're going short haul and they're the dirtiest of the dirty trucks for the most part. And so the benefits, the societal and public health benefits are just tremendous and so incredibly valuable. So I just don't want to miss that point.
Yeah. And one note from the Department of Energy is that in terms of battery electric long haul heavy duty trucks and drayage trucks and things like that, one of the things we're doing right now, we just released the selections for our Super Truck 3 awards. This is the third round of research for medium and heavy duty trucks. This one is significant in that it's looking much more at electrification. We had a lot more interest from our stakeholders in electrification. So keep an eye out for those research projects of we've had success with Super Truck turning into commercial products and Super Truck 1 and looking potentially at the same thing for Super Truck 2. So we're hoping that on the battery electric and hydrogen side that we'll see the same thing for Super Truck 3. So those are just getting started. Hopefully in the next 5 years or so, we'll see some results from those.
Right, and as was it 14 states are looking to adopt the Advanced Clean Truck Rule and other things, that it just drives the innovation, and gives some assurance to people that they're creating something that's real and for real use, because it's a lot of money to invest in that R&D. So we want to make sure that there's a place for people at the end of the tunnel. And clearly Long Beach sending that signal that they're going to zero emissions at their port and with their trucks. I mean, you can't have a louder signal than that. So, it can be done.
Great. Well, one of the questions that we wanted to pose to the panelists and to really any of the folks on the roundtable are, what can states do to identify fleets that are contributing to overburden pollution in certain areas? I know that you can certainly have a kind of a blanket mandate require that all vehicles in an area go zero emission, but how can you really target specific fleets? And if there are any insights from the panelists on that?
Well, one thing I would say is that if, say, for example, the construction of warehouses, if part of the community benefit agreement or the deal for being able to site anywhere in the state or in regions that are considered, prime, if they had a requirement to have zero emission vehicles coming to their gate, then, then people are going to either step up or they're going to go somewhere else, right? So, but if everybody has the same policy, and makes it a level playing field, then, if you want to move your goods, like Amazon, well, then do zero emissions. So I think you have to partner some of this stuff up with mandates. I mean, let's be honest, California would you have moved as fast as you did if there weren't sort of statutory CARB, the legal lawsuit of NRDC and others? Would you have moved as fast as you did without being sort of forced to do it? I don't think so, but I'm very pleased that you all stepped up to the plate, so that's the biggest challenge for most of us, is that all this stuff is voluntary and out of the goodness of your heart. And it's just, it has to be, there have to be mandates here at some point to get to where we want to go. It'll drive the price down, as you do it.
So I'll just chime in. I know the California Air Resources Board does an inventory of all the sources of emissions. And so they're able to drill down into the different sectors to identify, which truck types are the greatest polluters. I think they made it clear that drayage is a focus with the governor's executive order, focusing on a 2035 goal for the drayage trucks to be zero emissions. In that case, that was copy pasted probably from LA Long Beach, but we've been targeting the drayage sector in particular because that's where we have authority. We have a ports drayage truck registry. Every year trucks need to register in order to have any entrance into our terminals. So that's, where we actually have a hold to make some decisions and to pass tariffs that impact, those trucks that are coming in and out. And so, since 2006, we've, rapidly increased requirements for trucks coming in and out of the San Pedro Bay ports. So for example, when we passed the 2017 update, we made a requirement in 2018 that any truck that's newly registering in our registry has to be 2014 model year or newer. At the time that was aggressive. Now we're talking about zero. But there are certainly ways that port authorities can have influence over, specific sources that come or leave, their property. So that's one way, but I think for states, it's really important to look at your inventories to identify, where you should be targeting your efforts, and then consider, which strategies are most cost effective. You see zero emission goals out of the ports of LA and Long Beach for trucks and cargo handling equipment. We don't have a zero emission ocean going vessel goal yet because the technology is very far behind. So we try to find other ways to reduce emissions from ships, including demonstration projects, vessel speed reduction, incentivizing cleaner ships to come. So I think there's a variety of tools in the toolbox. Regulation is certainly one of them. And we continue to push for federal regulation or even international regulation to help even the playing field. But grants and subsidies, voluntary programs such as vessel speed reduction have actually been really impactful for reducing emissions and encouraging that early turnover, and then doing the demonstrations that are needed to support the actual rulemaking, right? You need data and information to support rulemaking. So those early adopters are critical to getting us to a rule that's feasible.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And in contrast to California on the year of the truck that can come into the port, we're at, I think maybe this year or next year, they will prohibit a 2000 year engine truck. So we are so far behind, in this case, 14 years behind, where we could be, the Port Authority and others could be better leaders on this one.
Well, I did want to turn to some of the states. I know that through the Volkswagen settlement and other funding mechanisms, states have long been supporting medium and heavy duty electrification. Joe, I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about insights from the state of Texas and what you've been seeing in the medium and heavy duty space.
Yeah, this is, I'm Joe Walton, I'm with the state of Texas. We have two programs here. One is the TERP program, the Texas Emission Reduction Plan. It's been around since 2000. This current biennium, we work on a 2-year cycle. We'll have $200 and something million worth of grants we'll give out, maybe closer to 300 million. And then on top of that, we do the Volkswagen Mitigation Trust. With all that money, we get more applicants than we have money for. Now, most of this is diesel to diesel, emission reductions, older diesel for newer, cleaner diesel, because that's the cheapest. And so, people tend to go where the money goes, but we've done a fair number of electric projects as well. The main thing is outreach and informing the interested parties on how the program works, what is the price breaks of applying, and those kind of things to make it important to them to apply. We do this without any mandates. We do this without any, rules and regulations. These are total voluntary programs. And if we set the grant amount at a cost per ton that is, still a reasonable part for the state to pay for, where we're not overpaying, but enough of an incentive for the grantee to pass up a normal type of disposing of an older truck for something newer, that if that price break is good enough at a point that they're going to want to use the program and get, whether it's electric truck or something else or electric vehicle. What we're seeing right now, though, the most in our electric infrastructure, though, is in the cargo handling equipment itself. That's where we're seeing the most at this point in time, in airport ground support equipment, since we're on the subject. And because the technology is farther along there and there's more products available. The truck market is there more around the local delivery. So you're talking, your things that serve, from a warehouse to where they're going to sell the equipment, or sell the product, or delivery to a home. Various companies. The heavy duty electric truck we've just not really seen yet, but it's on the horizon. Peterbilt's here in Texas. They have a big plant, and they're starting to build a lot of electric. It's in their plan to build a lot of electric. So it's in the near future. We just, it's just not hitting the market yet. Just like school buses, they just kind of hit this last year in reality. So you're going to see in the next year or two the bigger trucks come in.
Great, thank you. And Carolyn, I know there's a lot of work going on in Ohio with vehicle electrification also. I'm wondering if you have any insights to share or specific barriers that you've seen.
Hi, thanks, Cassie. We've been fortunate in that we have just funded our first 3 electric switchers. So we're excited to see those moving forward. And we funded 4 diesel electric hybrid tugboats. We had to go through a DERA option and a lot of revisions on that project. So it was a lot of work, but we had some very nice emission reductions from both of those. We've only done 1 medium grade class 4 to 7 truck so far. We haven't seen the big trucks coming in yet. In the early days, most of the fleet applicants we were getting were the public sector fleets. So electric transit buses, for example, a few of those. Now we're looking forward and we're hearing from our stakeholders, we're going to be seeing more interest in the heavy duty trucks, in part because of the corporate sustainability initiatives of major actors in the economy, Amazon and some of the others that have a big presence in some of our auto industry as well with their suppliers. So we're partnering with that. And an interesting aspect of that has also been the push for smart technology that's going on with our Drive Ohio program as well. For example, we're testing ways to notify the trucks for all the suppliers to the Honda plant and the Rickenbacker Airport south of Columbus, which is a major freight hub coming in, to get those trucks to not sit in line and idle, but to know when is the right time to leave to get to the airport. So some exciting things going on the technology side that are coming in. We've been able to do terminal tractors. There's a lot of interest. We've had some port cargo handling. We did a massive amount of outreach and we didn't have quite as much turnaround on that as we had hoped for our Lake Erie ports, but most of our ports are bulk terminals. So that may be one of the things that's affecting that. We actually have a couple of Ohio River ports that are interested too. So we're doing, as Joe said, the outreach is very, very important.
That's great.
You know, I was
Joe?
just going to say, you know, for the equipment, one thing that creates opportunity is that, you know, the cargo handling equipment, the gantries and the like, you know, every 5 years you have to kind of retool the engine. You sort of, terminal operators have it in as part of their plan. They know they're always going to be, you know, redoing engines or whatever, and they could do a maintenance plan to actually move towards electric in a different kind of way than a drayage truck or an independent owner operator, where these trucks are on the road for 20, 30 years and they're held together with bubble gum and glue stick, and you know, drivers who gouge out their tires so that they can get more tread because they can't afford to buy a new tire. So it's a very different dynamic, you know, thinking about who has the capital to invest and can even get a loan. Most drivers can't even get a loan, no less purchase a $350,000 truck. And when they do buy a truck, it's a $25,000 truck that's already got 1 million miles on it. So again, you know, very different. And that's why fleet, you know, ownership is so critical. And it's also part of a whole larger economic issue about drivers and whether they're really independent owner operators or they're really, you know, sweatshops on wheels, and they're really bound by the people who dispatch them and set all the rules for how their rates are set. Very different than, you know, a terminal operator who really can control that environment and make those kinds of investments and actually get the capital because it can actually get a loan to do that kind of work. Very different dynamic. Economic dynamics get you clean air if you can get it right.
You, Joe?
Yeah, I was gonna, go on. We're talking about the people that are adopting when it comes to electric. One of our major grocery store chains at a talk a year and a half ago or so, they're going to go to convert for all their their trucks to electric. They're heavy duty trucks. They're class 8 and 9 kind of things. And after the purchase is made, he made the remark that it cost 34 cents, somewhere around there, a mile to push a diesel truck down the road, where it cost him 3 cents a mile to push an electric truck down the road. So after the initial purchase, it made more sense to them to go electric. But the other part of that equation is those trucks also come back to roost. They come back home to roost. So you're talking about fleets that aren't doing cross-country driving, or they're not going from, Dallas to Houston type driving. You're talking about those that go out, may run several hundred miles in a day, but come back home every night. And those they can charge on the cheap electricity that comes at night. They can, insure power for them, keep everything going. So those are what looks like to be our first big adopters, are those kind of fleets. Mm-hmm. Now, your independent truck driver that picks up at a port or somewhere and goes down the road, and his jobs are from contract to contract, from day to day, you're not going to see them as your early adopters, because there's too ambiguity in what he's going to be doing and where his money's coming from or his jobs are coming from. So the electric is, even if you made it free, truck is just too risky for him to do his long range planning. So you're going to see the fleets first, then you're going to get those individual operators as the infrastructure gets out there, as the products get out there and everything else.
Thanks, Joe. Robert, I'd love to turn to you to hear a little bit about Michigan's approach to medium and heavy duty electrification. I know that there's a lot of effort to support economic development opportunities along regional routes and at ports. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I got to say that Joe and Carolyn have done a lot. They're more advanced than what we are in Michigan. Michigan, we have been supporting the conversion or the transition from heavy duty vehicles to electric. diesel heavy duty vehicles to electric heavy duty vehicles. And we've done it with Volkswagen funds, but it's not a lot of money. We need more. We've had a series of RFPs that are out there. We funded a number of projects that involve conversion from diesel buses to electric buses. We've funded conversion from dump trucks to diesel dump trucks to electric, and we're beginning to get into trying to fund our first electric switcher. We're hoping, we have our fingers crossed, that we'll be able to do that soon. A lot of what we're thinking about is charging. I mean, we have one of the busiest bridge in America, other than the border system between the U.S. and Mexico and Texas and California. We have a huge shipment or transfer of goods across the Ambassador Bridge. And so we're looking at, how could we incentivize the conversion of fleets between Windsor, which is on the other side of the closest major hub within the province of Ontario, Windsor, Canada, in Detroit, in looking at, how do we electrify that? And that's why I was asking the questions earlier about wireless, because, we have a number of trucks that are coming across that bridge, and we have a number of trucks that are queuing up to go across the bridge. And if, they're sitting there idling, that's causing air pollution within that area. And one of the things we've been thinking about is, how do we aid in that electrification or incentivizing that, in addition to the funding, can we do wireless charging or some other form of charging while those vehicles or medium duty vehicles are just sitting there waiting to cross the bridge? Can we aid in their charging? So we've put a lot of thought into it, and we're looking at doing some demonstration and some pilot projects in that area that would that would test the technology and hopefully accelerate the fleet conversions within that area of Michigan. So that's basically it. We're looking more at the charging aspect of it. Then we're hoping that, through some changes in legislation, we can incentivize the procurement of heavy duty vehicles. And when that happens, we'll have the charging infrastructure in place to support it.
That's great. And Robert, I know that Maria had mentioned the Rev Midwest MOU a little bit earlier. I'm wondering if you or both of you could maybe say a little bit more about that effort and what role you see regional coordination playing in freight electrification.
Sure. I guess I can take the first stab at it, and Maria, then you could fill in the gaps. That's really dealing with light duty vehicles, but I assume that it could also support heavy duty traffic. When you look at, and what the project is a relationship between several states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, to electrify the Lake Michigan coastline. And we're doing modeling work to look at where are the most strategic points to put charging stations along that coastline that would aid in facilitating EV travel in that area. And so we're doing the modeling work to look at where the charging stations should be located, as well as the number of chargers that should be located at each charging station. What's unique about this relationship, what Maria and I we share, is that 80% of the coastlines really is in Wisconsin and Michigan. So we bear the burden of the travel along that coastline. So from my perspective, that when we're building this infrastructure and we're doing this modeling work, not only should we take into consideration, the charging of light duty vehicles, we need to take into consideration the charging of, medium as well as heavy duty vehicles too. And I think it's really possible. When I look at the number of retail gas stations that are located up in our Upper Peninsula, out of the total number of outlets that we have across the state, there's only 300 in the Upper Peninsula. And so it would be easy in order to get to that number of charging stations along that route to support not only light duty travel, but as well as heavy duty travel. So that's kind of the plan. It's this partnership of these states. We're all agreeing that we need to work together cooperatively together to build out this charging network, support not only tourism, but as well as commerce in the states participating in this pact. So Maria, do you want to add?
Yeah, so just a little clarification. So my comments earlier were actually on Rev Midwest, which does address, it does address accelerating medium duty and heavy duty fleet electrification, as well as elevating economic growth and industry leadership and advancing equity and clean environment. And it does have that medium duty and heavy duty focus. It is 5 states, including Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. And as a subset of that, what Robert was referring to is our Lake Michigan circuit, which is like the circle tour around the lake and focusing on the modeling as it relates to that. And so just to point out that the states have these great opportunities to be, get in alignment on various issues. And so, it behooves us, especially with the federal funding coming and with all of us working in this space, to work together and to figure out the economies of scale, how we can, we are super grateful for the work that Robert has done and the modeling work and the network and connections he's made on the data side. Because we can benefit from that and learn and utilize some of the best practices to help us to map out what it looks like for our state. So I think it just is a testament to being able to have those conversations and to be able to leverage the information so that we can make informed decisions on how to move forward.
That's great, thanks. And I know that you guys had talked about, the need for modeling as well as getting appropriate data. I'm wondering if there's kind of a plan for the region right now and figuring out what those data needs are, or any early thoughts on that?
So, I think clearly, we're working together. Robert and I are working together on the Lake Michigan circuit. I think the Rev Midwest team, we're basically, the states are standing up a task force related to that, and we're going to create a work plan. And I think we'll be able to define that, the parameters that we're looking for within that work plan, and be able to have more of that defined along the way. I know each individual state also has their own work. The Wisconsin Department of Transportation Economic Development Corp recently received an EDA ARPA grant, sorry for the acronyms, American Recovery Act grant for $1 million to do planning and analysis specific to Wisconsin on infrastructure, as well as supply chain. And so we're going to analyze these 2 tracks and really dig into the data and figure out what can Wisconsin do to accelerate. And we have a fast track for that. We recognize that the states are getting significant amount of funding, and we need to plan and we need to be ready, and we need to have that data in order to be able to make informed decisions on where to direct the funding and how to handle it when it comes.
Right. Michigan, we've already taken that approach where we've done the modeling work. We've worked with the autos, we've worked with the utility companies, as well as with the electric vehicle charging supply equipment companies, and so with our Public Service Commission. So we've done a series of modeling that shows where these charging stations should be located across Michigan and the number of chargers that should be located there. And it's based upon the number of trips that we're counting in Michigan in these specific areas. And we're looking at, the models that would suggest that assuming that 20% of the trips that are being monitored across the state of those were electrified, and what would be the EV charging infrastructure that would be needed to support that level of of travel and trips that we're seeing across the state. And then we're partnering with the utilities. The utilities have have received permission from our Public Service Commission to provide rebates to host sites that are willing to install DC fast chargers along this network that we're proposing that we've cited for the charging stations to be located. And so we've made significant progress in terms of identifying the sites, identifying partners, and then actually using Volkswagen money and other sources of funding. We're hoping to use the infrastructure bill. We are using some of the American Rescue Plan funds for it, as well as some state appropriations to build the sites. And we're using a 1/3 funding model to do it, and 1/3 from utilities, 1/3 from the host, and 1/3 from the state. So that has enabled us to actually build out our infrastructure, our charging infrastructure, fairly rapidly across the state.
One thing that Red Hook Container Terminal
by the year 2035.
I was just going to say, one thing that Red Hook Container Terminal took advantage of is that for a long time they were the largest terminal they took in the most bananas to our region, and they had refrigerators where they put their bananas. And so they had all this electrical, infrastructure already there. And so they sort of just converted those lines that they already had to make their charging infrastructure for their 10 vehicles that they have. And what's really interesting, talking to them and talking to people, the drivers are just clamoring to drive the electric vehicles because they get so sick from the diesel fumes from the trucks the yard tractors that they were driving. And yard tractors are off-road vehicles, so they have even less pollution controls on them. And so it's just really been interesting to even hear the drivers inside the terminal, are just really relieved to drive them and are anxious and to drive them because, they don't get so sick at the end of the day. So, but if we could find more opportunities where those kind of high-powered lines are already there, and take advantage, like this is like a unique situation at Red Hook Container Terminal, but still it drove the price down because there was other infrastructure in there to make it easier for them to come in and set up the charging. So when we think about redevelopment, we might think about those things.
Absolutely. And importing the most bananas is an excellent byline for a company. So very good. Candy, I'm wondering if we could also turn to you to hear a little bit about some of the unique considerations in the West. I know that it's a little bit of a different game out in Nevada, and that there's been a lot of focus paid to light duty electrification, but would love to hear about what the state of Nevada is thinking about helping to incentivize medium and heavy duty vehicles, and would also like to open up to the other states too to kind of think about this discussion of what is it that states can do to incentivize transition to zero emission medium and heavy duty vehicles. Candy?
Sure. We are currently in the infancy stages, and it's so exciting to hear what all the other states are doing. We have our friends to the west of us, California, who have put in some really strong regulations. And being that we are a pass-through state, we're looking at how we can keep up with their efforts, or at least make it so that the trucks that come from Nevada into California are more welcomed here. We at NDOT are currently working on a pilot program, beginning stages of a pilot program for our freeway service management truck, which goes around and helps people get off the freeways when they break down or have a flat tire. And they're looking to implement an electric vehicle to do that. So that's very exciting. And the truck itself is very similar to what an ambulance is. So it would be considered a mid-size vehicle. So we're working with them right now to put those efforts together and come up with the specs for the vehicle. And that's in Northern Nevada. Also in Northern Nevada, we have UPS and FedEx for the local deliveries, and the box trucks are part of their fleet is considered electric now. And they have been very helpful with the Nevada Trucking Association. meeting with other fleets and letting them know how they're doing it. Our state right now, as a whole, NDOT is not able to give incentives for purchasing electric vehicles. We're at the infancy part of trying to figure out how we can go about doing that. We don't have state income tax, so we're trying to figure out how to do that, and we're looking at other states that also don't have state income tax to see how they're able to do that. I know a lot of them right now, it's just through their general purchasing tax, but we haven't crossed that bridge yet. The Nevada Trucking Association is also working with the larger fleets that are doing cross-country driving, and they are just keeping the fleets together and working with the Fleet Association to help them overcome the boundaries of how old your truck can be and how to get into new trucks. And when you are getting into new trucks, are you looking at the alternative fuels? So those are our big efforts right now. NDOT itself, our heavy duty fleets, we are at the very early stages of trying to figure out how to have our snow plows and larger trucks. And I know you guys are all going snow in Nevada, but yes, we do have snow in Nevada. We're trying to figure out where the market is going with those vehicles. And at this point, our service manager he's digging deep to see what we can do here to help reduce the greenhouse gases. We are basically looking at our passenger vehicles and replacing some of our personal fleet and getting some electric vehicles online. That will be happening by the end of 2022. So we're looking forward to that effort. And I have to mimic what Maria was saying earlier about all of the states getting together and sharing the information. We rely on Rev West a lot to just partner and come up with ideas and share our wins so that each state can start at a higher level versus stumbling upon the same blocks that everybody else has already stumbled on. So we're hopeful. I mean, we're hopeful for that it continues, and would love to be able to partner with other states outside of Rev West. And I think that's about it for us.
Great, thank you. Joe, and then Mike.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're asking where the states get the money. For our TERP program in Texas, it's a dedicated fund that comes to us, and it comes from, it's legislative mandate. We didn't do it. It was our state legislator did it. But it's a 1% fee on any purchase of a heavy duty diesel in the state of Texas. If you get your heavy duty diesel inspected, there's a $10 fee as well. If you're doing a heavy duty non-road piece of equipment or rent one, again, there's another 1% or 1.5% fee there. And including car registrations in the state, there's also a fee as well there. And that all adds up to, 170 million to up to $200 million a year in dedicated funds that come straight to us. Now, some of it goes to our highways, but most of it comes right to us, and there's no other use for that. So you can't rob from Peter to pay Paul. It is our dedicated money to implement these programs with, and being dedicated really helps for future planning. So just people wonder where our money comes from. That's where it comes from.
Love that idea, Joe. Thank you.
Mike.
And I'll mute myself. Yeah, I just wanted to mention, just to supplement or support a lot of this conversation under the bipartisan infrastructure bill, their DOT will be establishing electric vehicle charging corridors that will support freight and goods movement. I know, looking at the participation list, there's many people on here that are familiar with Federal Highways Bulk Fuel Corridor Designation Program. This would be a new kind of spin-off that's just looking at, medium and heavy duty. And it talks about, looking at strategic locations along highways and good movements locations, including ports, intermodal centers, and warehousing locations. all the stuff in New Jersey. So I think we have a year to stand up this program. Will it follow the existing program where we seek nominations from states? We don't know those details yet, but within a year, we have to designate corridors. So I suspect that the planning will begin soon on this to stand up this program. And we'll probably be looking for input from a lot of folks on this call. You know, what is a freight corridor? What kind of things should we be thinking about in terms of, you know, charging levels and locations, and, you know, how to build out from ports and other areas. So I just wanted to throw that out just in case folks weren't aware of it.
Thank you, Mike. And I'm wondering if we could also maybe hear a little bit about some of the support that will be coming from DOT as well as DOE on the medium and heavy duty side. I know we talk a lot about focusing on light duty charging infrastructure, the joint office that's being stood up between DOT and DOE, but I'm wondering if you both could share a little bit of information on any of the analytical support or tools, as well as just the support for building the programs on the medium and heavy duty side.
So in the infrastructure bill, both DOT and DOE are directed to establish a new joint office of energy and transportation. It hasn't happened yet. There's been some preliminary, you know, work behind the scenes. Money hasn't flowed there yet. The goal is to kind of get it off the ground in early 2022. And the focus of that is to establish this office to provide resources, tools and resources, technical assistance to states and locals that will be implementing the $7.5 billion in funding for electric vehicle. $5 billion is dedicated to electric vehicle corridors and then communities, and then $2.5 billion is for EV and then other alternative fuels for both corridor and communities. So this office, you know, it hasn't been put together, but we'll be drawing on folks from, you know, DOE, the DOE National Labs, DOT's various modes, and other organizations, probably, you know, where I work at Volpe, to provide resources. So, you know, once again, details are TBD, but you could expect a whole, you know, website full of tools and resources, probably folks that you can email and talk to, lessons learned, best practices. Sounds like a lot of the things that, you know, you do, Cassie, for Rev West. Will kind of take that idea and spread it nationally as folks are really trying to implement this money and make sure it's done correctly.
Yeah, and from the DOE side, you know, I think Mike summed it up pretty well for Mike, as you would say. A lot of what DOE is going to be doing is playing a technical assistance role, certainly in the electric school bus. There's a big electric school bus initiative within the bipartisan infrastructure law. EPA is going to be administering that money, but we have a role to play in technical assistance. And, you know, obviously we have a lot of tools already available and tools that we plan on creating. You know, beyond that, you know, DOE has, in its regular appropriations, has done quite a bit of, TI has done quite a bit of work in deploying and testing medium and heavy duty alternative fuel vehicles, including electric vehicles. So what we call our proof of concept topics that we've had in past years, to get people to try out these technologies, to partner with Clean Cities coalitions, and just really put them in service and see how they work. So, you know, I can't say what we're going to be doing because we still are working under a continuing resolution, but, you know, proof of concept topics like that are something that TI has done for years, and something that, you know, our stakeholders are very interested in and in continuing. So
Great, thank you. Well, as we are approaching the top of the hour, and I know that we've kept you all for a long time, I think that we will begin to wrap up. And so I would like to just thank all of our panelists, as well as the participants in the round table, for sharing insights throughout this. And did just want to share a little bit about our next steps. And so, as you all know, as we said at the beginning, this workshop is part of a larger initiative with NASEO in partnership with NREL and the Department of Energy's Vehicle Technologies Office, as well as some of our other partners, to provide assistance to states as they're thinking through what's needed to invest in EV infrastructure under the Infrastructure Act. And so we are going to be issuing, or I should say hosting, a series of webinars at the beginning of the new year to really focus on model state EV programs. In the feedback that we've received from states through a number of online surveys that we've administered, it sounds like hearing about what other states are doing to stand up successful EV infrastructure and EV deployment programs is really a top priority. And so we'll be announcing the specific topics for each of the webinars in a couple of weeks, but wanted to just put our dates out there, and we'll be sending a formal announcement to everyone attending today's event. I did just want to say a few words of thanks also. In addition to our federal partners, we also are working with ICF and Atlas Public Policy on developing and consolidating some of the resources for states, and their partnership has been quite valuable. And also wanted to thank the various associations we have been working with to make sure that state agencies are aware of these education outreach events and are thoroughly briefed on the Infrastructure Act and opportunities under it. AASHTO, NARUC, NACA, NGA, all of the acronyms that you can imagine on the state side, plus of course the partners on the utility side with EEI, NRECA, and APPA. And so a big thanks to everyone on that front. And then, as Dylan has just put in the chat, we are going to be sending a survey to all of those who participated in our workshop to get some additional feedback again on what some of the barriers are that you anticipate to medium and heavy duty electrification, as well as just what would be helpful on electrification in general. And so with that, I think we will wrap up our event. But again, a thank you to our partners and to our presenters and states and all those who joined. And we will be talking again soon. Happy holidays. Goodbye.
Thank you, Cassie.
Thank you, Cassie.
Thanks, Cassie.
Great session. Thanks.